Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, and welcome to Transport Futures. Whether you're joining us from Canada, the USA, the UK, or Europe, my name is Martin Collier. I'm the Director of Healthy Transport Consulting and founder of Transport Futures. It's great to have you with us today, and we're going to get you to work right off the bat with a few polls. First is an easy question that I always like to ask since we're talking about transportation. How did you arrive to work and for this webinar today? Did you take one or all of the listed modes that are on this poll, or like me, did you simply roll out of bed and walk to your desk? So we'll see how people respond to that poll. I think Terry's going to be putting that up shortly. All right, believe it or not, it's been exactly 12 weeks since the highway planning webinar series got underway on February the 9th. Today's session is the last in our 7-part deep dive into expansion, optimization, replacement, financing, communications, construction, operations, and today's stakeholders' perspectives. Together, we are taking many related impacts into account, including COVID, inflation, labor and indigenous issues, disruptive technologies, and climate change. So let's take a quick look at that first poll results. If you've been, I'm not sure, I can't see the results there, Terry, maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, we'll get back to those in a second, I think. Anyways, because we got to go right on to the second. Oh, is that just coming up now? Okay, that's only coming up now. So, okay, I was going to go to the second poll of the day. We'll see how that one comes back. We're not going to be able to leave that one on for too long because I do want to get right to the next poll, which asks you the question which I've been asking at every one of these webinars since the beginning, and which many of you have answered before, but maybe based on what you've heard from our previous 37 speakers, maybe your position has shifted a bit. Considering your jurisdiction, should highways be expanded, optimized, or replaced? Or should all these scenarios be considered depending on location? So we'll leave that one up for a second. Because of course, given a broad range of economic, environmental, and social perspectives that must be taken into account, is it really possible to reach a consensus on whether highway networks should be expanded, optimized, and or replaced? Not all of you are going to agree with one of these choices, if our 6 previous polls with the same questions are any indication. I'm sure we could extrapolate the same responses from stakeholders who represent business, the environment, and other citizen groups. All say they represent the public interest when there are actually multiple public interests. So in this webinar, business associations, nonprofit, and community stakeholders will discuss how each highway option can positively or negatively address the objectives of their respective memberships and whether the same outcomes are true for society at large. We'll see where common ground can be found in each of our highway scenarios, where the tension points are, and what advice can be provided to government so all voices are heard. We're fortunate to have 8 speakers here to discuss all the details. I'm very proud to introduce Rebecca Lush with Transport Action Network based in Hampshire on England's southeast coast, working through her dinner hour. Mike Millian with the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada in Milton, Ontario. Eric Doherty with Climate Justice Victoria in BC, where he has barely had time to have his breakfast. Richard Lyle with the Residential Construction Council of Ontario in Vaughan, Ontario. Ben Crowther with America Walks and the Freeway Fighters Network in Boston. And 3 speakers based in downtown Toronto. Ben Dawkins with the C.D. Howe Institute. I think we're supposed to have Phil Poulton with Environmental Defense. I don't think Phil's joined us yet. And our facilitator, Nicole Swearhone with Third Party Public. Most of these fine folks agreed to speak at Transport Futures on less than 4 weeks' notice. So please give them all a big virtual round of applause. Can almost hear it. So let's see, do we have a second poll result there, Terry? Has that been up long enough to get the second poll? We'll see what happens. So depends on location as a big winner on that one. Nobody for a place. We usually get a few on that one. And the next one, expanded and optimized. So, okay, that'll be interesting. We'll see. We're going to ask that question at the end of the day. We'll see if that one has changed. Our speakers will discuss highway benefits and impacts in great detail. So we want to see where you stand in the next two polls. First, tell us what you think are the 3 worst impacts of highways. And while you answer that, I'd like to call on Nicole Swarhone to provide some welcoming remarks in her role as facilitator. We go back at least 20 years to the Front Street Extension EA in 2002, I think it was, Nicole, when she was with Lura Group and I was writing a paper about the process for my planning degree. Since she struck out on her own, Nicole has worked with the Ministry of Transportation Ontario, the TTC, City of Toronto, on many transit and transportation projects, engaging a wide range of stakeholders. I was lucky to have her speak at Transport Futures during the Solving Gridlock Forum in June 2014, and we're very lucky to have her back with us today. Over to you, Nicole.
Thanks, Marty. I'll be super quick. It's a pleasure to be with the group, and my focus and the focus of our team is really very similar to the focus of exactly the topic today, which is that there are always multiple public interests. We can see how those public interests have different power and different ability to influence outcomes over time. And our burden collectively is, how do we want to try and influence government in the shaping of the policies and regulations and services that we collectively then influence and have provided for us. So we, our little team never advocates for outcomes on the projects that we're working on. We're really there as process stewards. And from our experience, and I was saying to the group as we were getting started, there's always people sort of who are absolutely for a certain direction, like highways. There's always people absolutely against highways, but what our experience is in talking to different interests and different communities is that the vast majority of people fall somewhere in the middle where it depends, and it depends on certain conditions. And so then we talk about what those conditions are, and that is the nuance that we need in order to move beyond sort of a simple polarization on issues and topics. And from our experience, people are very, very capable of digging deep on negotiating and understanding and learning things through the process of discussion. And so I think that I'm really excited to hear what the panelists have to say today. And the setup is really, and the organization of the conversations is really in Marty's lap. And after the break, you'll hear more from me in sort of provoking some discussion and hopefully some questions from you. So that's it. Marty, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Nicole, for that overview. And I look forward to you facilitating today's discussion. Let's take a look at our third poll results. So here are the worst impacts. So sprawl and environment get the top 2. Car dependence, I threw that in at the last second. I wasn't sure, and that one got third. So interesting. Well, we'll see how that plays out in the presentations and discussion today. Our fourth poll considers the flip side of that highway coin. Tell us what you think are the top 3 highway benefits. And while you're answering that question, I want to thank our sponsors of the entire highway planning webinar series. The Daily Commercial News has been covering Transport Futures since our founding in 2008 and has come on as a sponsor this year. Vince Versace, Don Wall, Angela Gismondi, Lindsay Cole, Warren Fry, and their whole team have reported on 30 learning events to date. This is number 34 for Transport Futures. Transport Action Ontario has been attending Transport Futures since our founding and advising us since 2016. It's great to have Peter Misek, Ken Westgar, and Terry Johnson here with us. And Terry is making sure all the Zoom technology is running smoothly. And Michael Chu from MSC Consulting who you may have seen speak eloquently at the Expanding Highways webinar way back on February 9th, has been sponsoring and advising Transport Futures since he started attending our learning events in 2015. And I should also give a quick shout out to 407 ETR, who is good enough to financially sponsor the first 4 sessions in the series. And without these sponsors, we wouldn't be here together today. So please give them a major round of applause as well. As those of you who have attended Transport Futures before know, our learning events don't happen with the help and advice of key individuals, including many speakers who continue to support me year after year and way many years after they've actually spoken. There are too many with us today to name, but you know who you are. So please take a look at the online agenda, which is in the chat. It links to our speakers and facilitators' amazing bios. And due to the packed agenda, I won't be reading any of the bios, but I can say between everybody, there's about 200 years of experience. You can type your questions at any time in the Q&A box, which will be monitored by Terry, Nicole, and myself. You can also upvote another delegate's questions by giving it a thumbs up. Some may be answered in the Q&A box, and others will wait until the panel discussion beginning at 12:40. And we won't be able to get to them all, but we'll keep them aside and submit them to the speakers afterwards for sort of a post-webinar response. And we plan to be going for 3 hours with one 15-minute break at 12:25. And I'm realizing I'm already gone over my time. If you stay until the end, you may win a mobility raffle prize from our sponsors, Transport Action Ontario and Daily Commercial News. So let's take a look at our 4th poll results. There they are. Here are the top benefits of highways. And intercity travel and tourism got, oh, interesting. Okay, good. Yeah, okay. That very interesting results. We'll see. It'll be interesting to ask those same questions to the public at large, and we'll hear from our speakers, of course. So thanks for the responses to all 4 of those polls. And we'll ask, like I said, the scenario poll question again at the end of the webinar. So now I'd like to pass the mic over to Ben Crowler, who is the Advocacy Manager for America Walks and the Freeway Fighters Network. His bio is in the chat, and take it away, Ben.
Hey everyone, great to be here. Let me do the share my screen, song and dance. Marty, will you give me a thumbs up if that looks good?
It's looking good.
All right.
You're on your 2nd slide at this point.
Yep. All right. Yeah, so thanks everyone. It's great to be here. I'm Ben Crowther. I'm the Advocacy Manager for the national nonprofit America Walks. If you're not familiar with us, we support local advocates who are striving to make the places they live, work, play, and learn more accessible, walkable, equitable, and connected. America Walks, we've been around since 1996, but in 2021, we helped found the coalition, the Freeway Fighters Network. And this is a group that's nearly 40 different campaigns strong, as well as 400 individual members. The Freeway Fighters Network brings together local movements from across the United States that are seeking to either reconnect communities that are divided by highways and or stop highway expansions from causing new damage to communities. We take collective action at the national level, we offer mutual support, and we uplift each other's stories. So in that spirit, I'd like to tell a few of those stories today of places that have chosen to value people before highways. So of course, in storytelling, right, a picture's worth 1,000 words, as they say. And this is an image of the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's plan for an I-94 expansion through the city of Milwaukee. And take a look at this picture and just think about what sorts of values it embodies and who does it prioritize here. If we want to dig into this a little bit, there's only 3 objects in this image that stand out in 3 dimensions. And that's downtown, the ballpark, and the highway. And what does that say about this image's, these plans priorities? Looking around the rest of the highway, what are the neighborhoods there? They're literally flattened in this image. And sadly, this is really nothing new. This is an aerial photo from the mid-1970s that gives you a sense of the scale of what you have to clear to build a highway in the city. In this case, this is once again in Milwaukee, the right-of-way for the never-built Park West Freeway. In total, in Milwaukee, lost 17,000 homes and 1,000 businesses to highway construction. And you go about and you replicate this process in cities across the United States, that gets us to an estimated total of 1 million people or more nationwide displaced by highway building. So this is the system we have now. It's no doubt brought some benefits, but it's come with a whole lot of drawbacks, especially for the people who live around highways. They're dealing with the environmental hazards of vehicle exhaust, hollowed out neighborhoods, downtowns, commercial districts, and this massive barrier for mobility for anyone who's not in a car. Structures like these are cost prohibitive to maintain, and they suck away investments from other things like local streets and public transit. So are there other alternatives out there that work better for the residents living in these corridors? I'm going to tell a few stories. In 1948, Interstate 95, aka the Southwest Expressway, is slated to run straight through Boston and connected to an inner belt that would partition downtown and split the city of Cambridge to the north of the Charles River there in half. But neither of those highways are actually ever built. Community consensus against the project so strong that the governor at the time, Francis Sargent, he doesn't just cancel the project. He actually gets on TV in 1972 and tells the people of Massachusetts that the state is wrong, that building more highways isn't the answer to our transportation problems, especially when they come at the expense of communities. He ultimately goes to Washington and convinces Congress to write new legislation that allows states to reallocate funding for planned highways to other forms of transportation, like public transit. But like what you saw with the Park West Freeway in Milwaukee, it's already too late for a lot of the folks in the highway's path. The land's been cleared for the right-of-way to prepare for the highway's construction. And so there's all this empty land in the city, in Boston, that something has to be done with it. So we're about 50 years removed from that event, and we have the opportunity to see what can be built in place of a highway and what it looks like after it's had decades to mature. What's Boston do instead? Take a brief tour of the Southwest Corridor Park that now, today, fills the would-be highways right of way. So what can you build in place of that highway? First, green walking trails and bike paths that connect Boston's outer neighborhoods directly to the heart of the city. We have community gardens. There's over a dozen along the length of the Southwest Corridor Park. Connections directly to the neighborhoods. The park's permeable, you live along it, it's accessible to you. Public transit, as I mentioned. Boston builds an extension of the Orange Line subway within the planned right-of-way of the highway. There's Roxbury Community College, which is now home to the archival collection of the People Before Highways movement. There's affordable housing. 3 different public housing communities in the corridor that have the exact same level of access to the park as anyone else living there. There's protected bike lanes downtown. The corridor park continues in from the outer neighborhoods, but it changes form according to its context. And you have green space downtown. We've come all the way from the heart of Boston's Southwest neighborhoods into the center of the city. That's 14 minutes by that Orange Line train, 26 minutes by bike, a nice hour-and-a-half stroll on a sunny day like this. And for what it's worth, about 25 minutes by car in rush hour. Boston Southwest Corridor or Southwest Expressway is never built, but removing highways actually has similar, if not the same potential. This is Rochester's inner loop, Rochester, New York's inner loop east in 2014. In 2017, Rochester goes ahead and fills it in and becomes one of the most recent addition to completed Highways to Boulevards projects. So this is what it looks like in 2019. The city's replaced the highway with Union Street, and it's reclaimed 6.5 acres of land from its right of way, which is now actually fully developed. The project cost the city of Rochester about $25 million. And in the first 2 years alone after its completion, it's generated $229 million in economic development along the corridor. So that's roughly a 10-fold return on that public investment. And even more, the projected life cycle cost for the maintenance and repairs of that part of the inner loop was estimated to be at $34 million. So that's $12 million more than the cost to remove it. And all this activity produces a ton of new economic opportunities as well. In terms of employment, the project's created in that first 2 years, again, 170 permanent jobs, as well as over 2,000 construction jobs. But for Rochester, this isn't just about making money. The city's actually set out from the start to steer development and fund amenities that make the neighborhood a more inclusive place and increase access to opportunities and services. And it's been able to do so by leveraging that expected economic development to address community concerns. So housing and affordability, a concern that plagues many cities today, is certainly one of them. And Rochester's Inner Loop East transformation, as you can see here, has built over 530 new housing units on that former highway's right of way. It's at 125,000 square feet of commercial space, and not just for any businesses, but businesses that neighborhood residents said they wanted to see, but they were lacking. Things like a pharmacy, a daycare center. And the transformation project also funds social programs as well. It provides homes for ex-offenders re-entering the workplace, people living with HIV, and seniors requiring assistance. And last but certainly not least, it's also changed how people get around and use the street. So Union Street features quality sidewalks, a 2-lane protected bike lane, signalized crosswalks, bike racks, benches, trees, landscaping, everything that makes a street a great place to walk. And this pays dividends. So between 2014 and 2019, walking increases in this corridor by 50% and biking by 60%. It's effectively decreased the reliance on cars and the costs that come with them, both financial and otherwise. And the city, Inner Loop East, has been so successful, this transformation, that the city is now actually committed to look to the removal of the northern part of that highway too. So what's the future for urban highways? Some may say their future looks bright, with state departments of transportation across the United States, pitching many proposals to expand them. But that future is in flux, I think, if a lot of the grassroots campaigns like these out there have their say. So each one of these campaigns stands for removing a highway, stopping a highway expansion, or both, and they're gaining a lot of ground. Like the people before highways movement before them, they value resident quality of life and the power of community. They want to see investments in their neighborhoods that add value locally, not subtract from it. So let's follow their lead and build more places like Boston's Southwest Corridor and Rochester's Union Street and support connected, people-centered communities.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Ben, for leading us off. Quick presentations will be by everybody, but we'll be coming back to you in a little while. But now I'd like to introduce Mike Millian. He's the president of the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, and the floor is yours, Mike.
Thank you. And I'll just start off by saying, hopefully you don't lose me halfway through. I have been having internet issues at home the last couple of days, and it has dropped a couple times this morning. So hopefully you don't lose me partway through this, and we'll we'll hope for the best. And I won't tell you who my internet provider is because we don't want to give them bad publicity. But I'll quickly just get into things. So the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, just so you know who we are and you know the perspective that my members come from. We are a trucking association, national in Canada. We've been around since 1977, and we represent mainly what we call private and dedicated fleets. And what a private fleet is, just so you're aware, is it's somebody whose main business isn't trucking, but they may have a large fleet of trucks or a small fleet of trucks to get their product or service to their customers. So think of Walmart, Home Hardware, Tim Hortons, Superior Propane, Canadian Blood Services, Lindy Canada. I could go on, but I think you don't, when you think of these brands, you don't think of trucks, but they have a large fleet of trucks that has to get the product and services to the stores, their customers, so you're able to use them. And a lot of these products are essential services to our day-to-day needs. So just a brief overview of what our membership represents. Our members represent roughly 17,000 trucks in our membership, over 24,000 drivers, and our members as a collective operated over 1 billion kilometers in 2022. They supply such things as groceries, medicines, blood, fuel for home and heat, among many other essential and non-essential items. And what I say to people, these trucks generally aren't out there because they want to be. They're out there because they have to be. So they can get to you what you need and what we all need to carry on with our day-to-day lives. Just to give you an idea of what the scope of transportation is in Canada, trucks move over 70% of the freight value in Canada. As everybody says, you know, there's all sorts of chains, there's rail, there's air, there's marine. But bottom line, the last mile and the first mile has to be on a truck because the truck has to get it to those ports, or a truck has to take it from those modes to get it into the areas that it's needed. The industry employs over 300,000 drivers in Canada and over 1.2 million people overall, second highest employer in the country behind hospitality. And the latest stats generated almost $40 billion of revenue in 2018. Overall, highway usage. So in Canada, where do we sit as far as the amount of vehicles that are on our public highways today? As you know, we're a country of roughly 38 million people. The number of registered vehicles in Canada, and this is all types of vehicles, any motorized vehicle that needs a license plate, basically. There's over 35 million vehicles registered in the country, and this is up 7.8% since 2014. So the amount of vehicles we're using is not going down, and the amount of vehicles that we have per capita per population is not going down. It continues to go up. And of course, the big issue is, and it makes sense, is a third of all the Canadians live in 3 big population areas: Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal. And of course, that leads to major congestion in those areas, in the highest populated areas, obviously, because of economies. People living there have to get to work, and products that have to be delivered for the people that live there. A 2019 Financial Post report showed on average, and this is a real issue, it was 24 minutes quicker for people to stay in their cars as opposed to taking public transit. And of course, we want to get people out of their cars and onto public transit. But if they don't see a benefit to it, to their time or to their cost, there's 2 main things they're going to look at: time, convenience, and cost. Well, if it's 24 minutes faster to take your own car, we need to improve public transit to try and divert more people off the highways to get onto public transit, to free up the roadways for the people that absolutely need to be on the highway. So we have to make improvements in those areas as well. How much does congestion cost our economy? So a Transport Canada report that was published 2019 in the Financial Post estimates this cost of congestion to be between 4.4 to 6.7 billion annually. So quite a range. But there's several other reports that suggest the cost in the GTA alone is over $6 billion per year. So the Transport Canada is for the whole country, but there's numerous reports out there that suggest it's over $6 billion just in the Greater Toronto area. A Texas A&M report in 2019 estimates the cost of congestion in the US to be $166 billion. And they started this report in 1982, and the cost of congestion has increased every year since 1982. So it hasn't really seen a lot of improvements along the way. Now, as somebody who represents a trucking association, people sometimes find it hard to believe when they hear me say this, but we don't support just nothing but building extra lanes of highways and building extra roads. We have to look at this from multiple different prongs. Building roads, expanding roads, maintaining roads and infrastructure is one part of the solution that we need. But building roads alone is not going to solve this issue. If we look back 30 years, the lanes that were going through Toronto were 2 or 3 in each direction. Well, we've more than quadrupled that, and congestion hasn't gotten any better because we can't keep up with the rate of growth. You know, it's all but impossible to build enough roads and lanes to keep up with the pace of our population growth in certain areas. One thing to keep in mind, trucks are required to be on the road. So we'd like to see congestion reduced. We need to improve public transit. We need to better utilize what we have. And we need to change behaviors and patterns, as well as, you know, maintain infrastructure and maintain what we have. And for trucks, like I said, trucks can't get off the road. So we need less cars on the road to help trucks be able to deliver the products that you need. The GTA is expected to add 100,000 new residents per year. And as I mentioned, while new roads will be needed or expansions of existing roads may be needed, this is not going to alone fix the issue. One of the big bugaboos of mine is the 407. We need better utilization of what we have. And in the Toronto area, the 407 ETR is a vastly underutilized highway that already exists. If you're somebody who drives in the Greater Toronto area, go up and down the 401, you'll see lanes and lanes of trucks. I mean, because it's a big economic route down that corridor, either going into Toronto or going east and north. But if you go on to the 407 at the same time of day, there's hardly any trucks on it. And we need to divert some of these trucks off the 401 onto the 407 and better utilize that infrastructure that exists. We need to look at subsidizing the 407 for the use of trucks and divert traffic from the 401. And to give you an idea why we need to look at subsidizing, the cost at peak travel for a truck and trailer unit to go on the 407 is over $1.42 per kilometer. It's over $100 for a one-way trip around the city. So the road I'll use, if you look in the Milton area and get on the 401 at Oshawa, so you go around the city kind of to the north, and whether you're going east or west, you're bypassing the city if you're not delivering in Toronto. That's a 73-kilometer trip roughly, and the cost for a truck is over $100 for a one-way trip. And this discourages trucks from using that highway because it's just unaffordable and out of reach unless you're delivering on that section of road. And most shippers and receivers don't want to pay the extra cost for you to take that road. By comparison, the New York Thruway for a heavy truck is less than 20 cents per kilometer. So the cost is something that we need to reduce to get more vehicles on that road. A study by Transport Action Ontario in 2021 indicated subsidizing tolls could move anywhere from 12 to 21,000 trucks a day from the 401 to the 407. This would cost the province roughly $4 billion a year if they can if they can reach an agreement. The cost to build the 403 is estimated at over $6 billion upfront, or 413, sorry. So I'm not saying whether we do or don't need the 413, but what I am saying is we got a highway sitting there that is being massively underutilized by transport trucks because of the cost of it. And we need to find ways to get more transport trucks onto that road and remove some of the congestion from the 401. So in closing, even though we're a trucking association, I said we do support increased road usage, better ways of using roads, and in areas where we need it, increased lane usage and increased roads. But we have to have a multi-pronged approach. We have to get more cars off the road for public transit. We have to encourage more mobility uses, walking, cycling, to remove those people from the highways. It's not a single pronged approach, and we have to look at everything. And with that, I believe I'm right at my time, and I'll close out from here, and I'll be back later. So thank you.
That's just-in-time delivery, for sure. Okay, thanks so much for that, Mike. And we're going to move right along to Phil Paulton, who is able to join us here. And I think, Phil, you got your presentation up there. He's the Ontario Environment Program Manager at Environmental Defense. So the virtual floor is yours, Phil.
Well, thanks for having me today. And I'm really so happy to have followed my friend from the Trucking Association because, you know, I was very pleased to see that, you know, he has already drawn attention to a lot of the points that I was going to make. So I think you'll find them easier to swallow coming from him. But just to explain who we are, Environmental Defense is a nonpartisan environmental NGO that is structured essentially around a stable of experts. So experts, in my case, on land use planning and environmental law and policy. In other cases, we have climate experts, we have a clean transportation expert, we have experts on the treatment of plastic waste, and we use that expertise to craft policy solutions, and then we advocate for those solutions with policymakers and with you know, with the public through advertising campaigns and you know, talking to our own extensive supporter base. And you know, we are the organization that you would probably most prominently associate with campaigns like Stop the 413, which seems very apropos here, but also with Stop the Big Sprawl campaign, with the Hands Off the Greenbelt campaign, and with the Hands Off Wetlands, Forests, and Farmland campaign. And the reason I am here and not our clean transportation expert today is that from our point of view, Highway 413 is not genuinely a transportation plan, but it is an arm of a plan to push sprawl into places where it otherwise wouldn't happen. It is really a publicly subsidized loss leader to prop up an offer from small developers, which otherwise wouldn't be very appealing, sprawl developers, sorry. And while the map of the Highway 413 is the map that's most commonly associated with our Highway 413 campaign itself, the real map that we need to be thinking of is this larger one, which I'm sharing you here, which is the plan for urban sprawl in the Greater Golden Horseshoe and in the GTAH in particular. And so just to draw your attention here, this line, this yellow line, this strip across the northwest corner of the GTA, that does not exist. That is the proposed Highway 413 route. And as you can see from this map, it runs through areas that are shown as red and yellow. And what does that mean? That means it runs through areas, those are areas that are not developed now. They are unbuilt land The yellow area is land that the current government has decided that it wants converted into sprawl. And the red areas are areas that were designated as open for sprawl years and years ago, but have sit unused because people just don't want to live out there. Let's be real, it's not the preferred place to live. And so when viewed in this context, it is very clear that the route of Highway 413 is not designed to address problems or transportation issues or bottlenecks in transportation for current GTA residents, but it is intended as a sort of public intervention to promote low-density car-dependent sprawl into places where it wouldn't happen otherwise. And the Highway 413 is, if you look at this map, the orange area to the north here, this is land that the government has forced boundary expansion into. These are areas that we would never touch without the 413. And so Highway 413 is the linchpin of a plan to do that sprawl, which we shouldn't be doing. And it's also the alternative to what would happen otherwise, which is this. In Brampton, in Peel region, what would happen without the 413 is the Heritage Heights plan. So this is the plan for that red area in Brampton that would otherwise be developed in denser, walkable, transit-supporting forms and patterns. Highway 413 is saying, no, we don't want to do it in this sustainable way. We want to do it in a car-dependent way. So it is a recipe for generating car trips that do not exist. And this is why, we are kind of, it's very helpful for us to have followed our friends from the trucking organization, because what we are saying is a sensible solution to existing transit issues and transportation issues is very much what he's saying. And that is to focus on making full utilization of Highway 407, and that means making it free or subsidizing it for truckers, so that truckers use the infrastructure that are already available. But over the long term, to make sure that we don't develop a need for the kind of housing, for the kind of road that's being proposed, we have a comprehensive plan to ensure that we reduce the number of car trips and reduce the demand for private commuters, for individual commuters to use these highways. So what we really need is a laser focus on reducing car trips. That means bringing each and every neighborhood outside of the core, every neighborhood that is built up as a residential area. We want it brought up to densities that support public transit, that make it viable. So we're talking bringing every residential neighborhood up to 100 people per hectare. We want to use the next 30 years of population growth, not to sprawl further outwards, but to fix the mistake that is the past half century of land use planning. So that means converting through proposals like that Heritage Heights project, all of our existing low density subdivisions into the kinds of communities that we know already, even here in Canada, do not generate a lot of road trips. So in our view, this is a session about the future of highways. The future of highways is intimately lined up with the future of land use planning and the future of cities. And so for us, the future that entails Highway 413 is a future that involves the Greater Golden Horseshoe sprawling into the areas that are shown as orange on this map, and sprawling into the areas that are shown in brown, which are green belts. And the future, which does not involve Highway 413, is a future where we accommodate the next 30 years of population growth within the gray area that's shown here, that's overwhelmingly been built at densities that generate car trips because they don't support the necessities within walking distance. And it's a future in which we restrict greenfield development to the areas in red. And that is the vast 350 square kilometer supply of unused designated greenfield area in the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Yeah, I guess I'll just leave it there. It is vital if you want, like, how does this translate into what we are telling people locally? Like, what is the local action? So people think that Highway 413 is simply a PR campaign to pressure the government not to do Highway 413. But if you look at our communications to supporters, what it means is building and uniting people who want to protect the Greenbelt, want to stop sprawl, want to stop Highway 413 around a realistic, complete alternative to doing these things. And so that means that if you have a Stop the 413 sign on your lawn in the city of Toronto, it means that you support opening up your neighborhood to denser forms of housing. You support opening up quiet side streets that are currently limited to single detached homes for thousands and thousands of more 1,000 square foot apartments in not just multiplex buildings, but buildings of 4 to 6 stories. It means that you support high-rise development in major transit station areas, but it also means you support densifying avenues. And so we actually have a Stop the 413 campaign in the city of Toronto. But the linchpin of the Stop 413 campaign in the city of Toronto is to improve enough compact land efficient homes within Toronto to maintain the city of Toronto's share of the GTHA's population up to 2051. So that means growing the city of Toronto's population by 1.46 million residents over the next 30 years versus the less than 700,000 population growth that the Ford government has assigned to us and that council has been going along with today. That means ending exclusionary zoning. It means rapid TO bus lanes. So our Stop the 413 project is really just one arm of the Stop Sprawl, Hands Off the Greenbelt, and Pro-Density campaign that we have, which is my Ontario Environment campaign. Thanks, folks.
Okay, definitely connecting all the dots there, Phil, for sure. Thank you very much. And we're going to move over to my old friend Ben Dacus, who's the Director of Public Affairs at the C.D. Howe Institute. And now the virtual mic is yours.
Great.
There, Ben.
Great.
Take it away.
Thanks so much, Marty. Really glad to be here with everyone virtually. Looking forward to doing this one day in person again, wherever that may be. So very quickly, for those who aren't familiar with us, the C.D. Howe Institute is a registered charity and independent not-for-profit research institute whose mission is to raise living standards by fostering economically sound public policies. And we're widely considered to be Canada's most influential think tank and a source of trusted policy intelligence, distinguished by research. And we do over 60 high-quality research reports every year that's nonpartisan, evidence-based, and subject to a very rigorous review. And we have a network of hundreds of experts around the world, all across Canada in particular. And we hold dozens, historically before COVID, we did 80 plus policy events every year. So if you're not a member of the Institute, take a look at it, our work. We'd love to have you involved. So I started at the CD Hound Institute as a toddler, and in that role in the past, in my past life, I did a lot of work on urban economics, on housing policy, transportation policy. I did a year in the Ontario government, but now my job is to further the Institute's mission by enhancing its visibility, reputation, and the impact of its research. And one area that we've done a lot of work on, both myself and others, is on transport infrastructure. And the key takeaway I want to give you is right here, which is that government spending on major infrastructure is necessary to ensure that people can move around in growing cities. But putting more money into infrastructure doesn't solve the congestion problem. It merely postpones the next crisis in which everything's congestion. The best way to reduce congestion, and at much less cost, is to use prices to allocate scarce road space. Canada has a pricing deficit, not necessarily an infrastructure deficit. So governments around the world have been putting in place policies that dramatically cut costs of congestion. In cities as different as London or Houston, Stockholm and Miami, Singapore and Minneapolis, like either the exact polar opposite kind of cities. What's common across all these different cities is that they have implemented some kind of pricing system, but a pricing system that is suited to fit their needs. And it's this local need. And what makes the most sense to get over the line politically, that is what I want to get into today. And for most of Canada, Ontario and the GTA in particular, the ideal solution is what are called hot lanes, or high occupancy toll lanes, an idea which combines traditional carpool lanes with dynamic prices. So I'm not going to spend much time on the case for congestion pricing. It's pretty simple, at least as an economist. The economic approach to it is that when I choose to use a highway, I'm not thinking about the effect on others. An optimal charge, an optimal price on the road, puts a price on both the direct costs that I impose in terms of the damage to the highway and paying off the capital cost, but also the cost that I'm imposing on slowing down others. When people often say that, oh, I'm stuck in traffic, but guess what? You're traffic too. You're imposing that cost on everyone else. So we need the charge needs to reflect that. A toll for using a road not only is going to reduce congestion, but it's also going to improve the fairness of government spending. Road pricing could bring the price that drivers are paying for infrastructure closer to the actual cost. Gas taxes, which are about 85% of total road-related revenues, vehicle licenses and other revenues from drivers have historically covered less than 70% of roadway expenses across Canada since 2008. And gas taxes are going to be a particularly unsustainable revenue source as vehicles are becoming more fuel efficient, they use less fuel, and have been falling in real terms substantially since 2002 and 2003. And that's about to fall off a cliff. As electric vehicles take off, fuel revenue is just going to plummet further in coming decades. But we need to figure out not only to solve congestion, but to pay for our highways. We need to figure out a way in which we're going to pay for our infrastructure. So to me, it fundamentally comes down to tolls. But to me, it comes down to also, how do we make it a political reality? And time and again, two core themes emerge. And when governments aren't thinking about them, this always stymies plans to introduce road pricing. The first is that drivers always want an alternative if they're going to be asked to pay for a toll. And second, drivers just simply do not accept paying for something when they've received it for free in the past. So this gets me to the smarter solution that we have in mind, a lot of people have in mind as to how to address congestion. And it's adding hot lanes to new highways. What is a hot lane? Let me get into this in a little more detail. They're usually a single highway lane that carpools can access for free, but are also available to single occupant vehicle drivers who pay a toll. Modern HOT lanes are separated from general purpose lanes by something as simple as special pavement striping or simple plastic vertical barriers. That makes them pretty easy to install. The price access a best-in-class hot lane should vary based on demand. Prices would be very low at night, but also very high during rush hour to ensure that the lane is congestion-free at all times. Those prices will be posted on road signs before the entrance So drivers could decide this is a potential time savings that they're going to get, knowing that a stretch of the hot lane is going to be congestion free is going to be worth that toll. Now, the simplest way for carpools to access the lanes for free is to give them an opt-in transponder system. And the driver would simply turn on the transponder when making a trip that they'd be using the HOT lane in carpool mode. And then all other vehicles would be able to use the lane, but with the highway operator using either photo recognition of license plates or something similar, some other technology like license plate recognition to determine where to send the bill. Now, hot lanes are very common across the United States in cities as diverse as San Diego, Seattle, Miami, many more cities in between. And Minneapolis, for example, converted its traditional carpool lanes into hot lanes. Now, a study there found that the economic benefits of doing so were more than double the operating and capital costs. Now, traditional carpool lanes have benefited a handful of drivers who are in carpools. We have to recognize that. But as a rule, many carpoolers would have driven together anyway, whether they're work colleagues, friends, or families. Carpool lanes just fundamentally don't change travel behavior all that much, so they're ineffective at reducing congestion. If we have currently congested or slow-moving carpool lanes that we could convert to hot lanes, they could have their minimum carpool thresholds increased to the 3 or more individuals per vehicle to ensure free-flowing travel, but also making sure that we are supporting some carpools going forward. Carpool lanes do help those few who happen to be driving with their families, but slow down the rest of the drivers. I, for one, benefit quite substantially from the carpool lanes when I drive with my family. But guess what? I was going to make that trip anyway. I'm going to use that carpool lane anyway. A hot lane is going to make everyone better off. Now, tolling only one lane is an important component of this because it allows choice for drivers. They can either use the regular non-price lanes or they can try the hot lane. This gives drivers an affordable option that policymakers always claim to be looking for when they have that non-price lane adjacent to it. And there's an economic benefit to having a choice too. When people choose to use either the toll lane or the free lane, they choose the option that best suits their needs. People in the most urgent time crunch can get to where they need to go quickly. This goes to one of the more important counterintuitive political points about hot lanes. Because one of the most fascinating things about the politics of congestion is that a huge chunk of the population likes traffic. What? Who would have ever thought of that? But when you step back and think of it, it makes a lot of sense for a lot of the population. For a large chunk of the population, it's the only time they get to themselves. They don't have their families all over them. They don't have their boss asking for something. This is time that they get to themselves to blast their music and have some quiet time. We should be giving people the option of what they're looking for with existing lanes. With a hot lane, the economic benefit per lane of putting tolls only one lane higher than the per lane benefit of tolling every lane. But when you only toll one lane, there's almost no economic harm and political cost to those unwilling to pay for faster travel. Now, the best part of a properly priced lane is that it can increase the overall capacity of a highway as opposed to a general purpose lane. This gets into some technical transportation engineering that I won't get into, but we can get into in the Q&A if interested. The last thing I'll get into in the politics is this idea that they're Lexus lanes, which is a terrible term because it's just not true. Hot lanes do not necessarily favor only those who can afford to pay the toll, because hot lanes are available for people who are using public transit. Buses, for example, are now going to be flying through highways. And low-income drivers report that they're just as willing to use hot lanes as survey respondents in other examples with higher incomes. Because every once in a while, for example, they'll need to pick up their kids from daycare when they're running short and face a fine, or be able to access another job opportunity if they're moving across jobs across the region. People tend to use hot lanes occasionally when they really need it. And again, this gets to the economic benefit of it. And I'll close with the progress that we've seen on hot lanes here in Ontario, which, to be honest, is pretty limited. So if you go back about 10 years now, the 2013 budget introduced or announced that there would be hot lanes on some provincial highways. And in the years since, we've seen some regular reiteration of this commitment, but the progress has been very slow. As of now, we only have a hot lane really on, as far as I know, on a limited stretch of about 17 kilometers on the QEW, the Queen Elizabeth Way, between Oakville and Burlington. And the design of this program is also really inefficient, because rather than have the price depend on demand, how it works is drivers enter a lottery for the right to purchase a hot lane permit for a fixed amount per month. The program, though, is more likely to hurt the case for hot lanes than help it. And because the price is fixed and paid up front, the rate that HOT permit holders are paying has nothing to do with actually alleviating congestion. In fact, it may make congestion worse at certain times, because the people who pay for this permit are probably likely to use it all at the same time. So this pilot program, the risk associating HOT lanes with bad planning, bad implementation, and therefore worsening congestion. These existing lanes are probably going to get even worse in the future, because electric vehicles get free access to these HOT lanes. And again, as electric vehicles become a larger and larger share, these HOV lanes are about to turn effectively back into general purpose lanes unless we change anything. So what's the point of this pilot? We either need to move soon to change these to properly toll HOTs with dynamic pricing, or abandon the pilot that we've seen so far. Now we'll need to try again for proper HOT lanes on expansion of highways. So MTO, I know there are a number of folks from MTO here. It's time to come in with a proposal on how to fix this, how to do this right for new expansions, such as any potential expansions to the 401 or other major highways that we see in the GTA. So Marty, I'll turn it back to you with that, and look forward to getting into this in more detail in the Q&A.
It sounds like the beginning of another hot lane campaign. So, all right, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move right along to Rebecca Lush. She's the Roads and Climate Campaigner at Transport Action Network, just southwest of London on the coast. So take it away there, Rebecca.
Hi. Sorry, am I just trying to share my screen?
There you go. It's
Great. Is that done?
yeah, perfect.
Fantastic. Hello. Hello, everyone, wherever you are. So I'm Becca Lush, and I'm the Roads and Climate Campaigner at Transport Action Network, based in the UK. Chris Todd set up Transport Action Network, or TAN for short, in 2019, and hopefully he'll be coming along soon, and we'll be able to participate in the panel as well, on the panel Q&A. So Chris set up TAN in 2019 after he was made redundant by Campaign for Better Transport, where his role was to support local groups and campaigners. Chris was concerned that there'd be no grassroots support for transport campaigners, and as no other NGOs are really doing this. And then he recruited me in 2020 as the Roads and Climate Campaigner for TAN, as I've got a 31-year record of campaigning about road building and climate change, believe it or not. Our mission is to provide what support we can to local community groups who are promoting sustainable transport or fighting road schemes and public transport cuts. As part of that support, we realised we needed to also tackle national policy and investment decisions, as these are the best way of helping local groups by removing the threats at source. So we work at a national level, covering England and Wales, but not Scotland, and at a grassroots level. And TAN was recently called to give evidence in Parliament, which is not bad considering we're only 3 years old. In England, what drives transport choices is little understood by most politicians and the public. They see a traffic jam and they conclude that the obvious solution is to build bigger or more roads. The problem is that this just adds to the problem, as we've all been discussing, given that new roads increase the traffic even faster than would happen without them, and we can't build our way out of congestion. The UK's National Road Programme, despite all of its investment, will still see traffic levels and congestion rise overall, so it's failing to tackle the very problem that it's supposed to be solving. And despite the phenomena of induced demand being well documented and the wider benefits that arise from greater active travel and public transport use, health, air, noise pollution, economic productivity, greater equality, better quality of life, etc., road building still remains the go-to solution. In the face of all this evidence, it feels very much that road building is more of a religion than a science. That's particularly true when road building is promoted on economic grounds. Yet many schemes in the UK National Roads Programme barely break even with the benefit cost ratios. And some, such as the massive road through the World Heritage Site at Stonehenge, which I'll discuss later, cost even more than they will ever generate in economic benefits. However, if there was a need for change, now is the time. As Antonio Guterres on the latest IPCC report said, our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once. Yet our government seems to be doing all it can to make things worse, continuing to give transport a free pass when domestic transport in the UK makes up 20% of UK carbon emissions. Unsurprisingly, the government is likely to be back in court over its net zero plans, which still fail to deliver sufficient carbon reductions. The government has already admitted it will fail to meet its international obligations under the Paris Agreement by 2030, yet it's continuing to promote road building while cutting behaviour change and modal shift investment, which is a double whammy given the latter are also the quickest way of reducing emissions. The problem we face is that unlike some other countries, we have no national transport policy. We have a series of siloed transport policies, but no real way of bringing them together to resolve their contradictions. And that's just within transport, let alone broadening it out to include health or climate change issues. The government is currently consulting on its national network's national policy statement, which guides decision-making for large infrastructure projects, mostly roads, but with some rail as well. However, it fails to consider other strategic interventions such as national bus and coach needs, wider electrification, tram, light rail, or a national cycle network. In fact, the sustainability appraisal that accompanies this policy statement is a work of pure fiction, and it looks like it's been written to support more road building rather than an objective appraisal of various transport interventions to help guide policy development. The treatment of alternative solutions, particularly important, you would have thought, given the road building spree will fail to tackle congestion, is also poor. And this runs right to the heart of the problem. A good example of the many failings of current roads policy can be found in the approach to the A303 Stonehenge scheme. I trust you've all heard of Stonehenge. So this is a £2.5 billion, which I Googled and discovered is 4.3 billion Canadian dollars scheme, which includes building a dual carriageway through the World Heritage Site, which is 5.4 kilometres wide, only part of which will be placed in a tunnel, which is 3 kilometres long. And it will increase traffic and cause greater congestion elsewhere along the route, as well as causing irrevocable damage to the World Heritage Site. It will lead to a massive increase in emissions from construction and its use, and potentially undermine investment in public transport and other alternatives. National Highways, the government-owned road building company, submitted an application to build this scheme in 2018, but a panel of planning inspectors examined the scheme in 2019, which reported to the Secretary of State for Transport in January 2020, recommending refusal. However, the Secretary of State overturned their recommendation and the road was approved in November 2020. However, that decision was then subsequently successfully challenged in the High Court, and the consent order was quashed in July 2021. But since then, the Secretary of State has held various consultations to redetermine the scheme, but to date has not issued a decision. It would be difficult to see how anything other than a refusal or a re-examine of a new proposal would suffice. And the main reason for the consent order being quashed was the treatment of the World Heritage Site, but also the failure to properly look at alternatives. There were no real choices during any of the consultations in the build-up to an application, and National Highways had effectively decided what it wanted to do without seriously examining alternatives, including non-road solutions or a combination of solutions. Its whole basis for the road was the benefits it would bring to the World Heritage Site. And there's no doubt there are some benefits, but it then ignored the huge harm it would cause. When looking at economic benefits, the only way they could make the scheme appear to be justified economically was to include £1 billion, that's 1.7 billion Canadian dollars, of dubious heritage benefits. Yet for a scheme causing irrevocable harm to the World Heritage Site, this is just not tenable. Without these benefits, which made up almost 3/4 of all the claimed economic benefits, the scheme is clearly in the red, costing almost twice as much as any economic benefits that might accrue from the road. Instead, the southwest of England desperately needs an alternative rail connection, as the coastal rail line is at increased risk due to its vulnerable coastal location. Last time it was out of action, following coastal erosion, it hit the local economy really badly. So the problem is spending on roads leaves less capital expenditure for rail, and we need to be prioritising investment into resilience and adaptation. Also, more and faster roads to the southwest of England risk exacerbating issues within Cornwall and Devon, encouraging greater car use in the summer when the two counties already get overrun by too much traffic. However, an example of doing things differently on a more structured and more evidence-based footing is in Wales. Over several years now, Wales has been building the case for a different approach, one that was more inclusive, fairer, and more sustainable. It started in 2015 with the passing of the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act, which requires public bodies to think about the long-term impact of their decisions and to prevent persistent problems such as poverty, health inequalities, and climate change. Then there was an adoption of net zero by 2050 in 2019, followed by a new transport strategy in 2021. It then set a series of targets around modal split and reducing car miles by 10% by 2030. Having a proper transport strategy helped frame the debate and provided the context for reviewing the roads programme. The outcome of the review is not to ban all future road building, as some have claimed, but to require all new road proposals to pass a series of tests, such as not increasing traffic and carbon emissions, or undermining shifts to public transport and active travel. While there's been an outcry in some places, the reality is that only a few of the roads would ever have been built given the current financial crisis. The downside is that the Welsh Government is struggling to find the money for bus, rail and active travel improvements, which are needed, not just to deliver the strategy, but also to win people over with regards to the new transport direction. We'd like to see the UK government take a similar approach for England, but at this moment it seems very unlikely. So the future needs a very different approach. We saw what was possible during the pandemic emergency. Yet the climate emergency, which is more serious in the longer term, is being treated like a short-term irritant, something that can be ignored or worked around. In fact, in the UK, we're actually going backwards, with the latest government rowing back on active travel and public transport commitments made under Boris Johnson. Technology is the solution they favour because it avoids having to make any real decisions now. But we'll continue to fight road building and seeking to shift spending to sustainable transport. We're also trying to shift the narrative to being about properly maintaining our existing road network, which is in a woeful state with £20 billion, which is 34 billion Canadian dollars backlog in road and bridge maintenance on local roads. And that doesn't include the funding required for the strategic road network. With an election likely within the next 18 months, there's a lot to play for. That's an update from the UK.
Thank you very much for that update. And we've had a few other British speakers over the last few months online, and it's good to have some things sort of confirmed again and again through these different updates for sure. So thank you very much for that, Rebecca. And I'm now gonna pass it over to Richard Lyall, President of the Residential Construction Council of Ontario, and also board member, I think, still with the RCCAO, and which has supported Transport Futures for many years until the world changed. Maybe again in the future. So over to you, Richard.
Well, you know, I hope so as well, but thank you for that introduction. And it's Nice to be here with everyone. My head's been exploding on the whole general thematic area that we're talking about: housing, transit. Well, transit, transportation, of course, and that's inextricably connected with housing. It kind of reminds me of a first-year philosophy course I took, where the first essay assignment was, "Where are we going and why?" And because there's a lot here, and there's a lot happening. You know, there's a lot of positive things happening. The fact that we're having these discussions and doing things is very positive. But we've had a lot of really bad planning, and you know, we're trying to work our way into or through some solutions on this stuff as we speak. But the planning has been, like in terms of growth planning, has been really quite deplorable. But let me start by saying what ResCon is. We're a council of builders and in Ontario, and our focus is on basically anything and everything to do with constructing homes of any form. And we build everything. We build the social housing, the condos, the rental apartment buildings, the low rise, and so on and so forth. And our focus is really originally, although we've evolved from that, was really on things to do with the actual construction. So technical standards, health and safety, you know, on-site situations, materials, supplies, innovation, and things like that. And as Martin alluded to, we did some years ago, we're a founding member of a labor management organization called the RCCO, which many of you are familiar with, and which is still operating and has sponsored dozens of research reports, independent research reports, because, you know, back in the day, and this was around when the growth plan was introduced or just before that, we realized that that there was missing research. It wasn't being done. And some of the work that was being done was kind of, they were loaded decks, right? So give me a paper to justify doing this, you know, that kind of thing. And so we got into that, and it's, I'm proud of the work that's been done there and is continuing to be done there. And we also set up, we're founding members of a thing called the Construction and Design Alliance of Ontario, which brings together the entire design and construction industry, all the various organizations in one council to be able to share things. Interestingly enough, there isn't a sort of a similar body on the government side like that. And of course, Canada is, you know, is a federation. So we've got a particular, one of the most decentralized countries in the world. So we have some additional challenges there with respect to, you know, getting things done. I mean, we've been running the number out there for some time that we've got, you know, for example, 45 different government agencies and bodies that have their fingers in the approvals pie in producing housing and so on. You know, I'm very passionate about this stuff. I've worked in trade policy, trade promotion, economic development, technology policy and government, and various other areas. And of course, in the industry, and I was a construction worker at one point in time originally, but, you know, I've been at this for well over 30 years. And we now face the biggest challenges that we've ever faced. But, you know, first and foremost, the first point I want to make is shelter is a need. And shelter is, you know, any form of housing, think of it that way. And it directly impacts every other factor in life. Unfortunately, I think to a certain extent that's been forgotten. You know, in any modern city that does not have housing that is affordable and ease of transit, will perform suboptimally and potentially begin to endure a process of steady and sustained relative decline. And we're in the midst of the most intense and severe housing affordability and supply crisis ever. There's nothing ever been like this. I mean, we've been through ups and downs before. And that, of course, is kind of, I think, to a certain extent, reflected in some problems with public transit and safety, oddly enough, or sadly enough, possibly. And of course, it's connected to transit issues. You know, we're just not very good at getting things done. And, you know, we're at a point now where we've got a growing, and it's getting worse, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. We've got a growing large number of people that simply can't afford the housing that we have, whether it's rental or whatever else like that. And of course, as we know, the social housing lists are, you know, they're continuing to get longer. But we still have many politicians talking about ensuring that everyone will have a home when it's not backed up by the necessary measures and the cost. I mean, you know, affordability ratios, 30% maybe of your income should be the norm, right? Roughly. I mean, there's different affordability measures where our costs are now double that. And of course, the fact that shelter costs so much has an effect on other elements in life. And so we've got a problem where public policy and housing market realities are still very much struggling to intersect. And we have grave concerns that the words are not being reflected in the actions. And many municipalities and the federal government in particular are kind of not quite engaged yet. In Ontario, the province of Ontario has been driving many housing changes and transportation expansion and so on. But it's often not well aligned with other levels of government. And that's just because other levels sometimes just aren't engaged, and there's not much you can do about that. So decisions are being taken, and you know, I'm not going to argue that they are the best decisions, because many decisions taken are heavily politicized. And that's a point I'm going to get to at the end of my remarks, what we need to do about that. And so, and, you know, the mistakes that are being made across the board in any number of policy levels, any area of industry and government are very expensive. And, you know, Canada is probably the richest country in the world, and should be, but you wouldn't know it based on some of our factors of life that are, you know, like, for example, housing people can't afford. I mean, it's astounding. You think, you talk to somebody in Singapore or Hong Kong about, or Holland about, you know, we've got land problems here, and they just look at you like you're nuts, right? And with justification. So in terms of transit, you know, we've recently now passed some Planning Act changes where you're going to have high density housing around major transit hubs. And that's great, but like, it should never have been a problem in the first place. And we still have huge problems with respect to, you know, getting as of right zoning along major transit corridors and avenues and the like, which aren't in place yet. And hopefully we'll get there. But regardless, the current landscape for residential construction sector has quite literally never been more challenging, and increasingly a combination of enormous economic pressures and challenging public policy initiatives are not aligning, and housing supply is suffering, of course. And so, like, since the 1970s, we've had a 68% increase in population, but only a 23% increase in housing. You know, so it's pretty simple math. And then we've got, you know, we're now supposed to double our housing production. And that's based on real demographic numbers. But that's at a time when we've got, you know, prohibitive interest rates, inflation problems, an outdated approvals process, lack of skilled tradespeople, retiring. You know, we got the baby boomers retiring, and all that experience, land restrictions, excessive taxes, fees, and levies, and just to name a few. And so, you know, here we are. And we attached, I think Martin's going to post it, is a recent report that we, through the RCCO on, interestingly, the title is An Uncomfortable Contradiction, and it's the taxation of housing in Ontario. We did the first report looking at what it is. And the number is 31%. So on $1 million piece of real estate in Ontario, you're going to pay $310,000 in taxes, fees, and levies. And that's pretty much tripled in a generation. And basically it's tripled because it's become a runaway train, and it's been, we tax it like a sin tax. We tax housing like alcohol. We tax it at twice the level of other produced products, which makes no sense. And it's showing up in the struggles that we're having. And part of it's a bit of a runaway train. It's justified by things like, well, growth pays for growth. Well, a development charge per unit on housing is completely regressive and inequitable. And since when should a particular industry have to incur most of the cost of growth? The consumers in that industry, new renters, new home buyers, even social housing. Although there's been a few changes there recently to try to fix that, but still the taxes are massive. And the federal government collects 39% of all the taxes and only puts, the number in the report is 7.1% back in public infrastructure investment, right? So now they weren't taxing this a generation ago like that. It's one of these things that was supposed to have been adjusted for inflation, never was. And now, they're rolling in all the dough and not, they're not investing in the infrastructure or housing to the extent that they should be.
Richard, I'm going to ask you to just wrap up, and we can
Okay.
go back to some of these things. So if you could
Okay,
just-
so what I was
30 seconds.
you got it. I'll just make a couple of final quick comments.
Great.
We've got some very big challenges related to climate change and some targets and objectives there that are they're not realistic. And but we can't get the cost benefit analysis to look at some of these things. And that has implications for not just housing, but for things like EVs and so on. Which are a problem, upgrading our grids, who's going to pay for it? Nobody wants to talk about it, that kind of thing, and what those costs might be. But really what we need a new model of getting things done. We need, I call it a new technocracy, because we have to depoliticize some of these things. We need the cost benefit analysis. There's no reason with big data analytics we can't be running simulations to say, okay, what is the impact of this going to be, or what is the impact of that going to be, or what is the best option, or even ask, how are we going to house all these people? We've got 500,000 people coming a year, and we're not producing the housing for them. There are changes being made, and plans, and good ones, and stuff like that. But, any good plan is only as good as how well it's implemented. So anyways, lots to talk about here. Sorry, I ran over time. Thank you. Look forward to any questions later on.
Yeah, definitely. We'll get back to that. Some great points. Good to have the housing perspective come in. I think it was my friend Ed Levy always said that housing is the flip side, or land use is the flip side of the transportation coin. So speaking of that, we're going to flip the coin from Ontario to British Columbia. Going to introduce Eric Doherty, who volunteers. Actually, you're going to have to tell me whether you're a volunteer or if you're a staff member with Climate Justice Victoria, because I know you run your EcoPath planning consultancy there as well. So over to you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. I'm a volunteer with Climate Justice Victoria, and I'm just going to start sharing my screen. And all right, is that looking all right? Okay, I want to start by talking about what Climate Justice Victoria is. Climate Justice Victoria is a all-volunteer group with about 400 supporters, most of them under 30. So that means that many of our members will be 50 or under in 2050. So this is, the climate action is personal for our membership. And we work closely with national groups like 350 Canada, locally with the big umbrella group, Greater Victoria Acting Together, and we're part of the BC Climate Emergency Campaign. I want to start just talking about how I got involved in transportation issues. In the early 2000s, I was working as an environmental consultant for BC Hydro and living in East Vancouver. And the provincial government decided that they wanted to expand the highway into East Vancouver. And as part of that, they wanted to basically bully the city into reversing their longstanding policy of not expanding road capacity for cars. This turned into a modern freeway revolt that brought many community groups, every environmental group to speak of in BC, large number of groups all came together for this Better Transit, Not Freeways campaign. The sign on the back of the cardboard bus at one of our East Vancouver festivals was seen all through my neighborhood. And at that time, I got laid off by BC Hydro and decided that this should be my career and went to planning school. I like to think that the work that I did there and that all of us did there, the hundreds of people who worked on this, including many academics and people in municipal government and provincial government, that it influenced the 2016 Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change. And if you listen to what the politicians in the government, the federal government, said at the time, it was very clear this was about shifting away from building highways to improving public transit. It hasn't really been fully implemented, but over the years, I think that less and less money has been going for, particularly for the big urban highway expansion projects. Still lots of loopholes in the federal funding, but there's been some small progress there. More recently, the BC government's policy is for reducing vehicle kilometers traveled by light duty vehicles 25% by 2030. This is a world-class standard. This is stronger than Scotland, stronger than many European countries. These are the kinds of numbers that cities in Europe are aiming for and are achieving. And the top two pieces in our BC climate plan are to reduce distances traveled and increase mode shift. So it just no longer makes any sense whatsoever to be expanding highway capacity if you're actually taking this seriously, if you're planning on actually reducing distances traveled and shifting people into public transit. As usual, governments move very slowly and there's internal divisions. What we've seen is a lot of talk and pave. In BC, we talk about talk and log from the government on environmental issues with forestry. In this case, the government has been talking and both been just plowing ahead, business as usual, with big highway expansion projects like the $1 billion highway expansion out into the Fraser Valley, and small ones like the Keating flyover interchange near where I live, which is only $77 million. It's peanuts in the scheme of things. What's changed is we've now got virtually every environmental group in the province of BC is now absolutely clear that highway expansion needs to stop and that money needs to be shifted over to public transit, cycling, rolling, and walking. That's simple. 500 groups have endorsed, and we're talking about not just in urban groups, but many rural and small town groups have endorsed this idea. But how do you get there? How do you actually reduce the traffic? How do we get to less cars on the road, as Mike pointed out earlier in this session, talking about how to move trucks, we need fewer cars. The fact is that cities around the world are doing it. Cities like Seoul, Korea have reallocated large proportions of their road network and demolished multiple major highways in the city core and heading out to the inner ring suburbs. What's happened? Traffic has gotten better. We call it traffic evaporation. I've written about this, peer-reviewed in Plan Canada. And it's something that every professional in the transportation field needs to know about. They need to know the science. This is climate action science, climate mitigation science. And I don't think it's acceptable to deny climate science anymore. And what we're seeing is not only is this doable, but it's very popular in the urban areas where road space is being reallocated. And we're seeing cities starting to talk about this in North America, in Canada. Vancouver's climate emergency plan calls for reallocating at least 11% of road space. This was written before the provincial climate target. And I'm expecting that many other municipalities will be heading in this same direction, setting these kinds of targets in the next 5 years. And on the global level, one of the pieces of work that I did was policy advice for Amnesty International Canada, which became their international or global policy. And Amnesty International Canada has now put their transportation policy opposing highway expansion into comic book form, and I helped with that. Talking about, from a young person's perspective, what is this doing to their communities when you're taking parts of school fields in order to widen a highway, when you know that it makes traffic worse. And that's the fact. That's what we've seen. It's not that highway expansion, doesn't solve the problem. You can't build your way out of congestion. Highway expansion in crowded urban areas makes traffic worse. So if this is the vision of the future for the urban areas, why would you be expanding and making more capacity on highways for private automobiles? And especially when we've got really cost-effective alternatives. The answer, where are the 76 people? The answer is they all get a seat on these buses, and there's a bunch of empty seats. Bus lanes are far more effective as a transportation mode than general purpose lanes. The shoulder bus lane, as we've seen in Ottawa and other regions, I think Ottawa is really the pioneer in Canada, hugely effective way of low cost public transit. They're also emergency vehicle lanes. And they can also, the higher grade ones, maybe they can even be electric truck lanes. So just to conclude, I think that climate action has to be non-negotiable in this conversation. For my membership, people who are going to be 50, 55, 45 in 2050, climate action can't be it just can't be a something that is just another checkbox on the list.
Okay, thanks very much. We'll get back to that. And actually, one of our polls was going to be asking, how do we move forward on highway and I guess transportation in general, thinking about future generations, basically. But maybe we can get back into that in the panel discussion. So we're running about 11 minutes behind. So what I'm going to do is we're going to shorten up the break a bit and just take about 10 minutes right now to grab a bite or go to the washroom, whatever you have to do, stretch, and we'll come back at 10 to 1, 12:50 p.m. Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time. So we'll see you in 10 minutes, and thank you to speakers for setting the stage for the discussion, and also to our sponsors, Daily Commercial News, Transport Action Ontario, and MSC Consulting. So we'll be back to you in about 11 minutes or so. Okay, talk to you then. Keep plowing through. We're going to keep plowing through now, and I'm going to hand things over to Nicole. Just a quick heads up that we don't see too many questions coming into that Q&A box. So please submit them or type them there. That would be great. And also Mike Mannion has to leave us at 1:30. So we're going to give him a chance to make sort of a final statement or final remark at around 1:28. So I'm going to pass it over to Nicole, and it's all yours.
Thanks, Marty, and thanks for the excellent presentations. We covered a lot of ground, as some of you said. I heard Ben off the top talking about and making us reflect on what our values are. And his frame there is people before highways, and with examples. Then Mike went deep into trucks with the Private Motor Truck Council, thinking about how to subsidize 407 use by trucks, and also moving to get cars off the road to reduce congestion. Then we had Phil, had a real focus on land use, and we were looking at the maps of particularly the GTA there. Ben with CD Howe talked about pricing and using price to allocate scarce road space, and the high occupancy toll lanes. Rebecca on sort of the Transport Action Network, what stuck out to me was the fact that she was talking about needing to look for alternatives. Richard went deep on the high cost of housing and who pays for growth, and then wrapped up with the climate, a real focus on climate and climate action being non-negotiable. I'm only doing that because there was a lot, and I tried to put it into 1 or 2 points each, which I'm sure does not do justice. If I'm in the speaker's chair, it always makes me cringe to hear people do that. But in any case, we're trying to get people to get their heads around it. So what I would like to do is just, given the diversity of perspectives that were shared, and some of you brought a similar frame, some of you brought different frames. What I'm interested in is really, given the frame that you're advocating for, can you offer up maybe each of you one big benefit, like who wins and who loses? Because the next question I'll ask you is, how do we find common ground? But of course, everybody thinks that their point of view, you're advocating for that point of view because you think it's the most persuasive, but lots of other people advocate for different points of view. So maybe from your perspective, I think I'll start with Eric, and then maybe I'll jump to Richard and go from there. But who really try and zero in on one benefit and who is benefiting when you kind of follow through with what Climate Justice Victoria is advocating for, and what you see as sort of the biggest challenge and who faces that big challenge if you move forward. And then Richard, I'll throw it to you. So Eric, jump in.
Yeah, I think that the really big benefit that I want to focus on is on the affordability benefit for ordinary people. In the region I'm in, the regional district did a study of the affordability crunch, and it's the housing and transportation affordability crunch. They looked at it, and it's the car ownership. The car ownership is the one thing that is really squeezing ordinary working people in this region. And I think that's true all the way across Canada. I think that's a huge benefit that is not being countered. And from a business side of it, the fact that these people's disposable income has evaporated. It's all going to housing and cars.
Okay, so you get, just let me be really specific then, if more highways means, I mean, if you're, sorry, not more highways. If you think about it, if you move and push people out of cars onto transit, they don't have to buy a car, and so it's more affordable.
Exactly. And
Okay.
the people who are challenged by this,
Yeah.
are people who's, it's a change. It means less gasoline being sold. It means fewer cars being sold. And there's always a transition there, but it's a necessary transition. And the key is that the people whose lives are disrupted by that transition need to be treated fairly.
Okay.
Apologies, folks, but I had to step away for just a minute. What was the question we're addressing at the moment?
Hi, Phil. I already had a speakers list, so don't worry. I was
Okay.
going to pick on you once you were back. But basically, I said for each of the speakers, we covered so much ground. My question is, who benefits best if what you're advocating for materializes? Like, who is it and what do they benefit? Just one, not a long list. And then who faces the biggest challenge? What is that challenge and who faces it? And so the way Eric just responded was right in line with what I was asking, which is who benefits the most are, the folks who are already economically squeezed. And if we improve our transit system, then they're not going to have to rely on the car. They take that off on their affordability, what they face from an affordability perspective. It's much easier for them to afford transit and than it is to buy a car. They said housing and cars are, so that was, if I understood you well, Eric. It's hard to see that I'm looking at you, but I'm looking at you. But Richard, because we're seeing so many governments, as you mentioned, struggle with and try and address this housing crisis. And you went deep on the housing crisis. Maybe connecting to this conversation about highways, who benefits the most? And how, if the vision that you have materializes, and who might have the biggest challenge, and what might that challenge be?
Well, the biggest challenge and who benefits the most, they're kind of connected, although they're kind of separate things. But the people who benefits the most are the people that can least afford housing, can least afford mobility, and so on. And we're looking at, what we call working people, working, I don't want to say working class, but even middle income now, middle class. And then we've got people that through no fault of their own just can't afford housing. So, there is a huge growing need there. So, and they're being horribly let down now. And
But how's the highway going to help them? That's the point I want you to make the link to.
So yeah, I've got mixed views on the highway, and I'll tell you, you're going to think it's kind of funny. Decision making and getting things done it takes so long. It's like in building, people say, well, why aren't you more innovative and whatever else like that? It's because by the time we get through the process of getting to actually build something, nobody wants to try anything new. Let's just get it done. And it might be an ugly, occupancy or something like that, but at least it's a unit of housing. And so, just getting things built. And of course, we know there are well-documented problems with delays and things like that. I mean, the big problem really started back in 2005 when the growth plan was introduced. There was a trade-off, and it was a very good one. We don't want more sprawl, but we need higher density. But at the time, they took all the credit for ending sprawl, but then none of the changes were made to allow for higher density, which of course supports transit and stuff like that. And then what that then caused is it drove even more sprawl, but ex-urban, way out there. Because, behavioral psychology, people, a lot of younger families still wanted that home, right? Not to say that we can't produce, sort of low-rise feeling housing in a higher density format. We can do that. The Dutch are good at it, other people, but it was a huge mistake. And then what that did was it drove up the cost of land, of course, too. And that drove up the cost of housing, but incomes weren't increasing at the same pace. So we've created this mess through bad planning. And because, at the time they didn't want to deal with the opposition to density, they just wanted to take the credit for looking green.
Okay, good. So let me just jump in. So
Yeah.
the people who benefit the most, if the vision that you've got, what you're basically saying is like decision-making is taking too long. Nobody wants to try anything new. The growth plan, tried to put some structure around it, but without sufficient permissions or necessarily maybe a political climate to support the higher density. We'll see. I'm gonna, but I want to ask you also, who would be most challenged by the vision of the future that you're laying out? And I guess you're not taking a position on highways or no highways. So I guess your position is on decision-making and it taking too long and the system generally. Who gets challenged?
Yeah, we've got fierce NIMBY opposition to higher density, and that's been going on for some time, and it's still going on now. And it's, people say, hey, that's nice. Yeah, build higher density, but just not in our neighborhood.
Right.
Which is bizarre because they're the same people that will go to Copenhagen, Barcelona and say how beautiful it is.
Good. So I'm going to go Phil and then Rebecca on purpose because Phil was chomping at the bit to jump in any case, and he's really in that wheelhouse too. And then I'll go to Ben, Mike, Ben from CD Howe, and I'm kind of going almost in the reverse of your presentations, but not quite. So let's go next, Phil, and then Rebecca.
Right. So I'm going to start by kind of taking your question as you put it out there. And I'd say the people who would benefit most from our vision for housing and transportation in Ontario are people my age and mostly people younger than me who simply can't get access to a home at all. And especially within the kind of neighborhood where they say they'd much prefer to live. And that is, 2/3 of Ontario of GTHA residents overall. And so I think it's something like 80% of people, millennials and younger, would much prefer to live in a neighborhood where they didn't need a car to get to school, to work, or to do any of the things they need to do in life. But 2/3 of GTA residents say that their current locations aren't that kind of place. So we have a disconnect between the type of neighborhood that we've been building and the type of neighborhood that people want. And the goal of our policy is to turn our existing neighborhoods that are currently not the kind of places they need to be into the kind of places they need to be, and ensure that we do not build a single hectare of neighborhood that does not fit that criteria going forward. So
Good.
what that
So
means is, so
you got a
just
challenge.
in terms of housing supply,
Yeah.
the good news is that what we need to do in order to deliver that is precisely the same thing that we need to do in order to actually increase overall housing supply. Because I think we might get into a little quibble about this, but there are constraints on construction capacity in Ontario. Like we have construction labor issues, we have equipment issues, we have concrete issues, etc. And we've often heard the statistic that Canada has fewer homes per capita than
Well, I'm just gonna, because I want to get to everybody, I just want you to zero in on, maybe wrap up that thought and zero in on what challenge is faced and by who, if the vision that you're explaining emerges.
It's people who want more than frankly a 1,050 square foot home. Because very clearly, the only way that we can deliver 1.5 million homes within the next decade is by keeping a laser focus on maximizing the output of adequate homes and stopping the squandering of construction on these wasteful, oversized, over-resourced construction capacity. So some people are going to have to not get what they want so that everybody gets what they need. And that's just how it's going to have to be. And also people who want a neighborhood that doesn't have any poor people in it. Because frankly, every neighborhood is going to have housing for every income bracket. And those people are just going to have to suck it up.
Okay, so people who want a big home might not get one because
We just have to say, no,
smaller.
you can't have a big
And
home. And
People who
as,
don't wanna, people who don't wanna live next to people who have a range of incomes, including
yeah,
people.
and number three, I would
living in
say,
poverty.
just as, we could not have a modern city with everyone keeping horses in their backyard, in neighborhoods, there are going to have to be, part of it is you can't have more than one car, certainly, and within 30 years, there are going to have to be a lot of homes which just don't have an option of parking or owning a car with them. It's just got to be the reality, because in order to meet our climate targets, we can't just shift our existing car trips to EVs.
Yeah.
We have to drastically reduce the number of car trips, absolute terms. That
Got
means fewer people.
I'm
owning
gonna
cars.
jump in just so that we make sure, because 8 people or 7 people, I'm making sure we make the rounds. But I've got you loud and clear, and we're gonna make sure we come back to everybody more than once. And I'm just gonna get to everybody once, and then I'll move to the couple of the questions. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A, but Rebecca, and then Ben D, Mike, and then Ben C. So Rebecca, who wins what, or who benefits? Just one, and then who might face a challenge, and what would that challenge be?
Okay, I'll try and be very concise. Everyone benefits if we reduce traffic. Of course, the big elephant in the room is climate change. We all have to reduce our carbon emissions. Nobody benefits if temperatures increase. So the benefits of reducing traffic are well known, and if you increase active travel, cycling and walking, people get fitter. There's enormous health benefits. I don't know if people saw the research that came out of Europe this week about how I think it was the Dutch were the fittest nation in Europe because of the amount of cycling and walking, because all transport is geared around keeping people mobile. I've seen, I think elderly people particularly benefit from keeping active into old age. My parents were in their 70s and got an e-bike, an electric bike, and it absolutely changed their lives. They used the car once a fortnight, if that. They did everything on it. They would go out, do the weekly shopping with panniers, everything. And, that was in their 70s, and it completely changed everything for them, just getting a £800 bike. People that, who wouldn't benefit is, this is going to be difficult, particularly in Britain, in rural areas, where there's just nothing. We call them transport deserts, where there is literally nothing. So people who, where the bus services have been run down and they're just non-existent. Particularly that hits, the elderly, people who don't have cars, they become very, very isolated.
Good.
Yep. Okay.
Great.
I forgot to say one thing I forgot to mention in my presentation is Transport Action Network, the organisation I work for. We've just set up something called Low Traffic Futures, and it's sort of, while we're the sort of more negative campaign, Low Traffic Futures is our more positive thing about the vision. So I'm going to put a link in the chat to Low Traffic Future, which is all about the benefits of reducing traffic.
Good. And on the everybody benefits, when you assert that so boldly, whether I disagree or agree, the challenge is that it's not happening, and there's always a reason why it's not happening. And so that means somebody is a vested interest in perpetuating the existing proposals, for example, to expand highways. And so it's an interesting conundrum we sit in terms of how we're trying to govern ourselves. So Ben, CD Howe, nonpartisan, zeroed in on high occupancy toll lanes. If high occupancy toll lanes were all happening, who would benefit and why, and what might be a big challenge experienced by whom?
Sure. So I'll start off with the challenge, and it's the people who are watching here today. The biggest challenge is going to be the challenge I give to you to take away from today is on the MTO bureaucrats to design this thing, to move from this very simplistic lottery pilot program that made sense to get the ball rolling on it. It's been 10 years now since this got announced. look at this proper design policies, design, pricing design. Look at how this is done abroad and implement this. Bring a proposal to cabinet. Get your minister on board. Make the case for this. This is hard. It's on you to bring this. So I challenge you to do it. And to me, the beneficiaries of the HOT lane is frankly anyone who uses a highway, anyone who needs transportation, because HOT lanes can increase the overall capacity of the highway. It reduces hypercongestion. It solves what I call the Three Stooges problem. The Three Stooges problem is like there's an old Three Stooges skit where all three Stooges try to walk through a door at the same time. If all three of them are trying to walk through, none of them can get through. One of the Stooges needs to not go, needs to not be going through the door. We need to figure out a way in which we're prioritizing who's willing to go through first, willing to go last. So pricing is a way to do that. Pricing is a way to solve that prioritization problem. People who are willing to make a trip at a different time. So pricing is a way in which we can allocate resources the same way that we do for pretty much everything else. So that the beneficiaries are manyfold. People can shift their modes if they still want to travel at peak time to transit, to bus uses when they're or competing transit systems when they're priced out of the system, and can use something at a lower cost to them than monetary cost, but perhaps a higher time cost.
Okay. And that's interesting. But I want to make it through because Mike's only with us until 1:30. But in this conversation about people not being able to afford housing and people not being able to afford cars, then you're talking about a model about pricing certain people out. It's an interesting tension, potentially on the values we bring to it. But that we're setting up Ben Crowther for the last word in this question anyway. Mike. Millian, talk to us about who benefits the most and why, and who might have the biggest challenge and what that challenge might be. Vision you were explaining for the future emerges, which for me, the biggest message you had was sort of getting trucks onto the underutilized infrastructure, the 407.
Yeah, so I mean, I was talking about a specific case, but I think you could take it to any area where they have bypass routes around the city or underutilized highways. So who is going to benefit the most from that? I mean, really, first of all, who's going to benefit the most is likely my membership, which are the trucks that are going up and down the highways. But when we look in the broad scheme of things, really everybody's going to benefit from it. The people that need to be on that highway that goes through the downtown core are going to have less congestion if the vehicles that don't need to be on that highway are removed from it and are bypassing and going around it. And the ones that are going around it are now going to be sitting in less traffic. They're going to be making better time. There's economic benefits to everybody. It should help reduce your transportation costs. If the truck's sitting idle for 2 or 3 hours, or cars, there's a cost to that sitting idle, right? And somebody has to pay for that. So really just utilizing better what we have should benefit anybody that is on the highways. And it should overall help decrease some of our pollutants as well, because when you're sitting there idling, not doing anything, you're spewing pollutants into the atmosphere and nobody's getting any benefit out of it. So you got a double whammy there.
So who the biggest challenge?
As to who's challenged by it, I don't know. That's a tough one. Because we're really not advocating extra costs. I guess who would be challenged by it the most would be the governments having to subsidize the cost of this. However, they're really already subsidizing the cost of this anyway with inefficient traffic flows and inefficient highway designs. So I don't know who's challenged more by going to this route. I think we're all challenged if we don't go to this route because we're not utilizing what is currently there to the peak of its abilities.
Yeah, and I think it's the allocation of the public resources, then the challenge of how to allocate. I mean, I'm going to go to Ben Crowther but this is setting up well a conversation about if everybody thinks that everybody is going to benefit from what they're saying, then how do we have everything you're saying happen, right? Ben Crowther, America Walks. So we started with you. Remind us and maybe help us understand how you think about who benefits and why, and who might be challenged and why.
Yeah, thinking about the perspective from a particular context, urban highways. In the United States, in American cities, it's usually between 30 to 45% of a city's population is living within 500 feet of a highway that's known to be dangerous for your health. That's a barrier, right, to walking across that highway or biking across that highway, getting across that highway without a car. It damages small businesses in the neighborhoods. So those people have the most to gain, right? They no longer are a place you drive through, they're a place you go to. On the flip side, I would say, suburban commuters would be directly affected. What that increase in time of commute looks like varies on different, by city. But we said again and again during this conversation, we have to provide alternatives. And so providing alternatives to suburban commuting that is more than just driving alone in your car, it has to be imperative as well.
Good. So that speaks to some of the density that Phil was talking about, or some of the obstacles that Richard said might have been in place that didn't come along necessarily with the growth plan policy. Before we move, I want to make sure that before we lose Mike, we get to him. But in the back of your minds, the next big question for all of you is going to be, how do we find what needs to happen in order for things to move forward, recognizing how diverse your perspectives are. But there's a question here for Mike. Hi, Mike. How soon do you think we will see fully autonomous trucks on the road in Ontario? Does your organization support fully autonomous vehicles? So get into the detail a little bit.
Yeah, so, I mean, how long before we'll see fully autonomous? I mean, there's kind of two answers to that question. There is already some fully autonomous vehicles on the roadway, but they are in very, very strict areas, very controlled areas and in controlled environments. So in certain areas and certain fields are already there. Even in like Ottawa has a bus pilot, but the bus runs in a very controlled environment where the infrastructure has been set up for it and the communication has been set up for it. There's transport trucks running in mining operations and logging operations right now that are fully autonomous in controlled environments. But how long do I think before we're going to see it widespread? I don't believe we're going to see it in my lifetime, and I hope I'm alive for another 30 years or so. So that'll give you some perspective on it. And the reason I think that is because fully autonomous vehicles right now, unless they're in a controlled environment, are fully dependent on LiDAR and radar and the markings on roads. When it snows or rains, and if you've ever been in a car, and I'm sure most people have, you can put your car on adaptive cruise control, I call it. And as soon as it starts pouring rain, that adaptive cruise control shuts down because the sensor's blocked. And as long as we're relying on sensor and LiDAR and radar, you can never have a vehicle that's going to be fully autonomous. For it to be fully autonomous, we have to have the infrastructure built up where that vehicle is communicating with the infrastructure. And we are a long way from being anywhere close to that. So we're in favor of it in certain environments. What I will say is, the vehicles, I believe we're seeing the role change. And what I always tell everybody, the most safest and efficient vehicle on the road is a vehicle with all the safety features that can do as much as possible on its own and be paired with a fully trained and qualified operator. The role of that operator is going to change a bit. They maybe won't have to do as much of the hands-on as they are right now, but they're still going to have to be there. And I put it this way. Most of us fly at some point in time. Planes can pretty well 99% fly themselves. But if there's no pilot there, I'm not getting on, because I want to know if the plane fails, I'm not just dead. I want to know somebody's there that can take it over. And I think that's the way we have to think about transport trucks as well. These things can weigh up to 140,000 pounds.
Yeah.
Do you want somebody do you want the truck all by itself and then somebody hacks into the computer or a system fails and there's nobody there to take it over and pilot its safety on the road? So they're going to get more and more autonomous all the time. Personally, I like to call them driver assisted vehicles. The autonomous is a bit of a bugaboo with me, but
Yeah.
but we support as much as you can, but we're a long way from being there where you're going to see this en masse going down the road by themselves with no operator.
Good, thank you. I see that there was a question for Ben too, so maybe I'm going to throw it. I'll read it for Ben so everybody knows it, and then I'll go back to you, Mike, just on the next kind of question for all, because then I know you gotta head out, and it'll really be like, given everything you're hearing, you know, what the way that Marty and I had talked about it is like, what opportunities do you see to find common ground, you know, in the different perspectives we've shared? And I'll ask everybody that again. But Ben, the question for you here is, why should I support HOT lanes, hot lanes, when I know I don't afford it and I'll just be forced to take less efficient routes that take more time?
Gotcha. So the reason you should support it, even if you will never take the hot lane, is that converting a hyper-congested lane, the HOT lane, that is over there, that's currently congested, moving it into a hot lane, actually ends up putting more drivers through. You get more vehicles that can travel on that lane, and that increases throughput. And that means that a couple of the vehicles that would otherwise be sitting in your lane, slowing you down, are in that lane over there and getting through. So pricing in a way that, if it can eliminate this hypercongestion problem, if it can if it can solve that Three Stooges problem, even if you never use that hot lane, you benefit by that increase in capacity of the highway.
All right, good. So Mike, help us try and figure out, and all the folks that are listening, and Marty has said a number of people from MTO are typically participating. You know, their burden and the burden of governing is that they can't take what any one of you say and implement it. They need to figure out how to navigate these multiple public interests. And so what my experience tells me is that you can either lobby as hard as you can behind the scenes, or try and find some common ground collectively and tell governments that this is the common ground we found. And often then governments follow as opposed to lead. It's interesting. But of course, it depends on the policy issue. So do you see any opportunities to find common ground given what you've heard today? And if so, what opportunity or opportunities do you see?
For sure. And, you know, before I start, I'll just say, you know, I would not want to be the ones in government making these decisions, because they have all of us yelling and screaming at them. And no matter what decision they make, they please somebody and upset another 10 or 20 or 30. So they have a tough job as well. I would say for the common ground, I think there's a lot of good areas where we could see common ground. So I'll look at it from the trucking perspective. You know, if we improve public transit, which there has been a lot of investment going into public transit recently, in the last 3, 4, 5 years. Unfortunately, it takes a long time to get these things built. But if we improve public transit, increase public transit, getting it going out to more areas, it removes those people from the roadways that they're contributing to that congestion. So that is a huge benefit to the trucking industry, because you can't put a trailer load of groceries on public transit. It has to go on the truck or the other mode, and it has to go down the road. So anything you do that helps remove people from the road that don't need to be on the road is a benefit to our industry, and one that we would support, because it helps us. Like you said, you throw more lanes out there, but then we increase the population by 2-fold in the next 4 years. Well, those lanes aren't enough anymore. Now we need more lanes again, because we still got more cars on them. So the new people that are coming in, we have to get less and less and less of them on the highways. So it frees it up for the essential items and the tourism trips that we need every now and then too. I mean, we have to support that as well. But, you know, if we have more people walking, so we improve areas for people to walk, improve areas for people to bike. we improve mobility access to public transit. And at the same time, you know, we better utilize the roads we have. In some cases, we do have to add a lane or two here based on what the needs are. But I think if we're reasonable, I think if we all understand these are our needs, but we understand the other part, you can use it where some money and priorities go toward long-term planning to help all the sectors. And if we help all the sectors, it helps our each individual sector at the same time.
Okay, well said. I'm going to see if I can get through I don't think I'm going to get through the other 6 of them. So do you have any final before you have to take off? Do you have anything you want to add outside of that? Because I might not come back to you at 1:28. I don't know. Do you have anything you want to jump in on before?
Yeah, no, thanks. I don't think I have much more to add. And sorry, everybody, that I have to leave early. I just have a prior engagement at 1:30 that I couldn't get out of. Nothing really final to add. I think there was a lot of good points made by all the groups, and I do think there is positives that we can take from each one of our presentations and get some collaboration. And you know, when we're lobbying for one, we can lobby for all too. It just doesn't have to be our idea over others, right? I think it's great to bring groups of people like this together to talk about possible solutions, and I thank for the invite to speak here today. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm going to go then in the reverse order that I did on the previous question, or ish reverse. I mean, we'll see. Ben Crowther, you want to go next, and then I'll go to Ben Dawkins. I'll just go backwards, Rebecca, Phil, and from there. What do you see as opportunities or an opportunity to find common ground?
Yeah, I think a fix it first policy is something that I think we can all get behind. You know, from the trucking perspective, right? You want quality maintained roads. Commuters want quality maintained roads. And you know, the more we build, we already can't maintain the roads we have now. That's not in the budget. The more we build, it's just kicking the can to future generations to foot that bill. So let's start with, you know, really keeping what we have intact, and working from there. I think that's you know, that's common ground and a first step as we start to consider ways forward for the future of highways.
Okay, good. So fix it first. Mike's got improved public transit, get people or walking or biking or anything that as the new people are coming, they're less dependent on the road and the car. And then what we do have, fix it. If somebody is outrageously opposed to any of these opportunities for common ground, maybe flag it, because otherwise I'm going to say at the end, everybody thought those ideas were all great and there is our common ground. But anyway, I'm maybe not being quite that much of a troublemaker, but an instigation for everybody in any case. So Ben, we had Mike. So Ben Dawkins, what do you see as opportunities to find common ground?
To be honest, I think it's a really hard battle. The way that politics are going is that what's increasingly happening is a world in which political decisions are made for segmented markets. Where if you look at, you know, the 413 decision, you know, I live in High Park neighborhood. There are a ton of stop the 413 signs, but the Ontario government is going to be listening to the residents of High Park. The government will never ever win that riding. What they do care about are the ridings that are in Brampton and Mississauga, where the 413 is very popular, or that, you know, that they want to win there. So I don't think you're going to see common ground on things like that between you know, suburban communities and downtown communities where the politics of this are very diverse. So I'm honestly not optimistic about common ground, and it's going to be a consistent muddling through on, you know, varying priorities of levels of government based on, you know, the coalitions that elect them. And
so just on that, Ben, if I'm just gonna, you were mentioned sort of an urban and versus a suburban audience, and that what do you think a suburban audience thinks about improving public transit or fixing it first, as the first two speakers there said?
Oh, and certainly on public transit, I would agree that there's an attitude to fix it first,
Okay.
where there are some substantial concerns about transit safety right now, transit headways, where there's a lot more density of service that we can provide, and better service to people that they're willing to pay for. That would be the first place I would go. And with roads, like I go back to some, Kenneth hits on something in terms of like the fix it first. Fix it with what? Fix it with what money? I'm very, very concerned about in the future that we're going to have a substantial reduction in road toll, or sorry, road financing from gas taxes that we're just going to have to be pulling in increasingly from general revenue. And when it comes to trying to come up with a consensus on what to spend our tax dollars on, good luck. That's a brutal and difficult political battle that has many different takers, many different views, and good luck trying to ascribe any individual vote based on, oh, this is clearly a vote about we're spending our money on this versus that. This is to be what people in the government decide on, and what fits the general theme of what they want to work on.
All right, we're going to go out of the Ontario jurisdiction to the UK to Rebecca in a second. But what I heard you say was, yeah, political decisions are, good luck, Nicole, finding common ground, because political decisions are really for segmented markets, particularly, for example, urban, suburban. But then in terms of improving public transit, which Mike, was part of Mike's saw as an opportunity, you thought that maybe that would be something that suburban and urban might be able to get behind, improving public transit, if I heard you well, right, Ben? Dawkins.
Oh, sorry, that was me. Yeah,
I was just making sure that that's what I heard you say. Yeah, suburban. Yeah, so there at least there's one thing there.
Yeah.
Just making sure. All right. Okay, Rebecca, what's the story? What opportunities do you see to find common ground? And you're obviously in a different jurisdiction, so that might shake up the thinking a little, or maybe it's very similar. I'm not so sure.
No, it's very similar. I thought what Ben Crowther said was spot on. Because in the UK we have a statutory body that its role is to find out what road users want and inform government to inform their policy making. They're called Transport Focus, and they do regular polling, and every single time it comes out that the top priority for road users in the UK is road maintenance. That's where they want the money to go. So the fix it first is absolutely correct, as Ben said. And there is plenty of money. There's plenty of money for new road projects. There's billions and billions of pounds earmarked. So we've just got this 5-year road building programme at the moment in the UK called RIS2, and that's 24 billion. And that's just for 5 years. The RIS3 period from 2025 to 2030, they've got another 30 billion earmarked for that, another 30 billion from 2030 to 2035. There's no end of money, but it's all going into the wrong projects, which take us very expensively in the wrong direction. So that money could easily be switched for maintenance with money left over for active travel and public transport subsidies.
Yeah.
So, and it's popular. That's what the public want. But politicians like their big vanity projects. That's what we find in the UK. I don't know what if it's the same. They love their big, the projects that we're fighting have been around for decades. We call them zombie road schemes. And I've been fighting roads for 30 years. Some of them have literally been hanging around stinking since the 1990s. They're these old legacy projects that civil servants get attached to. They've been working their socks off for decades trying to get this thing built. Politicians like a ribbon to cut and a photo opportunity. They like their big projects. They don't want to open a cycle lane. They want to open a big thing. That's
isolated. That's isolated from the people that they represent wanting that big thing in any way.
Yeah, it's a photo opportunity. It's all about glory. Yes. I think it really is. It's down to ego, a lot of the decision making.
Yeah, we've got political decision. I'm kind of trying to track where each of you at least seems to think that there might be an opportunity for common ground, and then a couple of the things that are getting in the way, and the way that political decisions are made, vanity projects, ego, different segmented markets. That's interesting, just tracking, and then where that might get in the way. But that, we might be able to find some common ground around a rationale for improving public transit and fixing existing roads first. But as Ben Dock has said, that would mean that we would have to agree on some set of values for allocating public resources, and that might be hard. Okay, after Rebecca, I had Phil. I see Phil there. You've moved on my screen. And then, yeah, so Phil, do you want to go ahead? And then I have, after Phil, Richard.
Yeah, so in terms of common ground, I mean, I think we've seen some great examples of it here around the table today. If you were to ask a member of the public, they would assume that I and the folks from the Road Truckers Association and Richard Lyle over here would be all saying completely diametrically opposed, completely different things. But on stripping tolls from the 407 and focusing on moving traffic onto the 407, there was a lot of consensus around that point from people who you'd think would be opposed. And I think that's a symbolic of a solution. That's similar to the fix it first. Well, part of fixing it is fixing our use of existing infrastructure. And frankly, extending that fix it first theme, I think actually that the controversy that we're seeing, like the what looks externally like a huge fight, and really is a huge fight, is actually being an attempt to suppress an incipient formation of common ground on the issue of housing, and that is illustrated by the really kind of interesting, amazing relationship between environmental NGOs in our organization and the organization More Neighbors Toronto, where we are constantly, again and again, advocating for for exactly the same policies in neighborhoods. And I think that because of reality striking, because it's just, we're not going to be delivering 2,500 square feet homes or 2,000 square feet homes that are affordable or attainable to the average person. And eventually we're going to come to it's just we'll find out that they are not affordable. And the common consensus will be that the only way to actually get my generation and younger housed is to shift what housing looks like, to stop building the kind of neighborhoods we were building before and built the kind of neighborhoods that we were building before World War II. And I think that there's a consensus that is manifested in our relationship with More Neighbors, but also interestingly, because it became controversial after the fact, in the Hamilton decision on boundary expansion, where there was a crushing, overwhelming public outpouring of support for allocating 80% of future population growth to existing neighborhoods and allocating 30% of population growth, not just to those major transit station areas and corridors, but next door to your single detached home by getting rid of exclusionary zoning. There was a consensus that if it means that if we can do this, if we can save greenbelt and farmland and get the housing built, we are willing to change our neighborhoods. That was the model. And all but 3 councillors in what was previously not a super pro-density municipality united behind 80% of housing going to existing neighborhoods, locking them into that, so there was no way to get out of it. So that's the consensus, I think. Going forward, 1,000 square foot apartments, modest homes rather than these big homes, throwing out the post-World War II housing model, because it just won't work. And we're just going to have to square with that.
Okay, thank you. I got Richard and Eric D. And Marty's got a couple of other questions that we may have time for. Otherwise, I know we're going to give you all 1 minute for a wrap-up remark. But Richard, talk to me. What opportunities do you just see to find common ground? Maybe building on what others have said or something else, no problem.
Hey, look, I deputed recently. It was last year, and I was before Ian Underwood and after Eric Lombardi, Habitat and More Neighbors, and we were all saying the same thing. And it comes down to, like, we're finally fixing some things that should not have been a problem in the first place. And we're fixing the screw up with the introduction of the growth plan when they didn't deal with density issues. Yeah, it's going to take time to incorporate that stuff. But the bigger thing where there's common ground here, but some people don't like it. They don't like it when you say, hey, can I see your cost benefit analysis? Or, like, how do you think you're going to get there? And they don't want to talk about it. And then, we've actually been screamed at as climate change deniers because we pointed out that something just simply wasn't technically possible. That kind of thing. So you got hard heads on various sides. But we need to, and we've got a project with ACO Innovation Labs and CMHC digitizing Simcoe County. So we need to, applying digital twin technology, right? And methods. And actually we're working with a group out of the UK called TerraQuest. I think Rebecca probably knows about them because they're doing some very cool things in the UK. But we need to make better decisions. And the only way we're going to do that is by utilizing the technology that is now available and has been for some time. We're just slow. I mean, in fact, we're so slow in Ontario that it's reflected in the World Bank data and in the OECD data, and, in terms of how long it takes to get things done here. We've done the reports on showing it's taking longer and longer to get housing projects approved, if you can get them approved at all. And, we've got the report out now where taxes have tripled on new housing and rental housing and whatever, in a generation there's no justification to it. I mean, we don't tax cars, for example. When you buy a new car in Ontario, they don't say at the end, okay, and by the way, you got to pay another 20 grand for highway upkeep, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's what we do with housing. And who pays on these per unit fees are the people that can least afford it. And it's atrocious. But anyways, digital.
Yeah, and you said those before, and I've got that loud and clear, but
digital twinning. Technology and making better decisions that are fact-based decisions where you can say, okay, what is the best way to move people from A to B? What's the best way to, to Phil's point, like, what is the best form of housing or mix of housing in a certain area that we need to achieve a certain objective, and we can get some guidance there and make better informed decisions. Right now, our decision-making is awful.
Good. So your big message, you're more likely to find common ground if you have good information, and you can use, you can make better decisions in part if you use some of this technology that we have available, so that we're able to, and that might be a way to find more.
And run simulations, Rebecca, and we're not doing it now. Nobody's making decisions based on, okay, what impact will this have? And we can do that. There is a capability there, but they're not interested, many decision makers.
Understanding consequences. I bet everybody on this panel would be interested in being transparent about the consequences. So it's just from a different lens. Ben, I see your hand up, but unless you're really directly at Richard, I'd rather wrap up with Eric because he hasn't had a chance yet. Is that okay? Yeah, okay, good. Eric, opportunity to see common ground. What do you see?
Yeah, I think that as Richard just said, I think that there's potential for real common ground on decision making. I think in the transportation sector, decision-making has not generally, in Canada, decision-making has generally not been evidence-based. And I think we need evidence-based decision-making on traffic impacts and climate impacts of all these projects. And we need, I think we can also get a common consensus, not necessarily on the level of climate ambition that's really needed, but I think we can get consensus that we should be making real efforts to meet existing climate targets that Canadian federal and provincial governments and municipalities and regional districts have set. That would be a huge leap forward from where we were 5 years ago. Because, you know, and I'll say it like this, I don't think there's very many people here from BC to offend, but our Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure 5 years ago was horrible. Like, it's like blatant lies. I don't know who was signing off on those, but I certainly hope it was not a planner.
Okay, so I mean, the common ground, which is lovely, is that if we were just more transparent and we did evidence-based decisions based on good data, we would probably be moving in the right direction. Because I saw Richard nodding, but Eric's nodding. Nice. Nobody's shaking their head. So
Yeah, and that transparency has to mean no more black box models. Because there's private companies who will do a study for you, and the public, the expert public, universities ask them, well, how did you do this? They say, sorry, it's proprietary. That's got to go. That was so much of that was out and out fraudulent, and they were charging the public money for fraud. That's got to go out the window.
all right. Ben had his hand up. Ben, you still want to jump in? Ben Dawkins?
So just on the consensus point, which is, we have to keep in mind that this is a fairly, this is a very specific group of people who really care about this. We're all here to come and talk about housing and transportation. I challenge you to find a consensus among a neighborhood group in a neighborhood like Long Branch. Why do I use Long Branch? They have a residents association that is around a GO transit station, is going to be getting substantially improved access to downtown. And that is a neighborhood that is viscerally opposed to increased density. And those are local residents that vote. And those are the kinds of groups that they're not present here, but when it comes to real life, when it comes to getting behind a counselor, they're fighting very hard on increased density. So where I'm going with this is that I want to find ways to increase density, but we have to figure out a way in which it's going to be politically saleable in these kinds of neighborhoods. And if we don't see that, we're going to have to be, because we're not going to get that in every neighborhood. It's going to be hard to get to the kind of targets that we need in terms of really high density. So we should be still thinking about highway expansions to create greenfield expansion out in suburban. I've got a whole bunch of reactions here, because to me it's all of the above solution in terms of housing. We need to have increased density downtown, in downtown neighborhoods, and in suburban areas.
So do you think,
I thought it was firestorm.
I know I got Ben, Phil, Richard, but Ben Dawkins, would more transparency and understanding of consequences and sort of general evidence-based decision-making that had been flagged, would that, do you think, be of any utility to a general member of the public to understand sort of the bigger picture? Is there an opportunity there to share information and learn?
Richard thinks
they'll just take their hilarious.
I think they just take their own self-interest into account, which is their neighborhood and their house.
All right.
I think with some of those hardcore NIMBYs, the only thing you're going to agree on there is maybe something to do with torches and pitchforks. Other than that, there is nothing you can do. So that's why you literally have to go around them. That's why you can't leave certain decisions like these little neighborhoods. It's nice Jane Jacobs stuff and whatever, but they misread Jane Jacobs on some of those points. It's part of a bigger community. So this is where, for example, the province steps in and says, okay, through the Planning Act, this is what's allowed. We're going to have as of right zoning. We're going to get rid of exclusionary zoning, stuff like that. And then it's done. It's not, there's people that will not like it and they will never like it, but in the interest of building a better, broader community, it's the way to go.
Okay, Richard just jumped the queue, and
Sorry.
Phil has just jumped the screen sharing protocol. So before all chaos breaks out, and I think it was at 12:42, I was supposed to offer you all 1 minute for a wrap-up comment. So Phil, this is your wrap-up comment. Then I'm going to go to Ben Crowther for his wrap-up comment. So Phil, after you make your wrap-up comment, please take your slide down. Then Richard, I'll come back for your quick wrap-up comment, and then I'll go to the rest of the group, and then I'm handing it back to Marty. So as would be the case, even in a heated public meeting, it's never boring. Go, Phil, what do you got to say? Quick.
So firstly, it's kind of funny because just before Ben Dacus shared the comment, I shared our response to the Long Branch Residents Association's submission in that
Good,
exact
super quick,
process.
right?
And
Super quick.
yeah, and so the reality is those associations are just not representative of the majority view in those communities anymore. They are just the people who grab the mic, and they do not need to be part of any common ground. We can simply run over top of them and make consensus with the actual people who live in those communities.
You and
The
Richard
Long Branch
agree.
now, they don't speak for neighborhoods, and our polling shows it.
Good. Richard, you and Richard agree. I'm going to go to Ben Crowther. Thanks for being patient, Ben. The other two just took the opportunity to jump in, and go ahead. What's your final wrap-up remark here?
All right, final wrap up here, and this comes back to polling as well, thinking about highways. We've done some polling around highway expansions, and if we're talking about majorities, I would say this is a super majority. All right, here's the demographic breakdown of this polling. 34% urban, 45% suburban, 19% rural. 1/3 Democrat, 1/3 Republican, 1/3 independent. 8 out of 10 respondents said they know highway expansion doesn't work. This is something that is politically feasible. Goes to Rebecca's point. Who is out there supporting these projects? It's not the general public. They know it doesn't work.
Good. So it's other interests, not general public. All right, final remarks. Everybody else, I don't know, let me go clockwise on my screen, assuming you don't move. Rebecca, then Eric, then Richard, then Ben, and then we're done.
Okay, I'm going to have to go soon as well because it's dinner time here in the UK. I'm being called for dinner.
Yeah, go quickly then. Tell us any final remark you got.
I was just about to say that when you have future events like this, please invite Transport for New Homes, who are like a sister organisation for us, and they specialise, because you all seem to have very much a housing specialism in this group. And so Transport for New Homes are set up to campaign for better transport for new homes. So I'm going to put their website address in the chat for you.
Good. Thanks, Rebecca. I think we're going to wrap up on time. So can you stay until we're finished? 9 minutes?
Yep.
Okay, great. Eric D, final wrap-up remark.
Yeah, my wrap-up remark is that I think we really, like in the public is ready for a shift to public transit and away from highway expansion. Experts are ready for it. Now is the time. It's a very small minority that wants to go back to the 1950s model. And really, what I would ask of every one of you is to make the decisions that you make based on thinking about it like you were young enough that you would be 50 or under in 2050, when civilization could be falling apart, really falling apart, and you don't have enough to eat if things keep going the way they're going.
Okay, Richard, final comment.
Everything we're talking about, all the problems that we have, whether it's housing or transportation, they've all been fixed in other jurisdictions in one way or another. Nothing that we're talking about, even on technology, is anything that's new or, ooh, gee, it's a little out there or whatever. We're just doing a really bad job in growth planning. It's terrible. And so that's again where the digital twinning comes in, and we have to find a way to. And by the way, I think in our industry, we can't wait for government to do these things. This is why we funded the RCCO and you know, we funded the tax study and the infrastructure studies and things like that, because you can't wait for government. They're just not, I mean, they're not doing it, right? So
All right.
that's what we need to do.
Okay, good. Ben D, last but not least, everybody else had their final comment thrown in with their remark, and then I'm going to hand it back to you, Marty, for the wrap up.
Sure. So I agreed with a lot of what Richard said, that technology, there's a lot of technology tools, but we have to remember that technology gets us some of the way. It can't be a workaround to the core fundamental problem. And some of the core fundamental problems are in a sense of, you know, some of what Phil talked about. Like I hope Phil's right that these community groups are not representative of the overall sentiment in the neighborhood. But we're not there yet in terms of the local governments, provincial governments not listening to these groups. So we need to figure out a way in which we can ultimately make progress. So like I go back to my point that we're not going to get consensus. We're not going to get everyone on board. We need to figure out a mechanism of moving forward so that people are sufficiently included, that that there's not enough of a neighborhood outcry or environmental outcry about some sort of policy. Everything gets stopped. It's going to be a lot of incremental progress on highways, incremental progress on housing. So it won't be everything everyone wants, but we'll muddle through and hopefully get out the other end at 2050.
All right. All right, Marty, we're done. This was an outstanding group. Thanks all for working with me on that facilitated discussion, and over to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Nicole, for that awesome facilitation, and to our I was going to just say, you know, phenomenal speakers, but very passionate. I think through the 7 webinars, it's definitely reached a new level, and first time the screen's been taken over. So congratulations to Phil on that. And I want to thank Phil, Eric Doherty, Richard Lyle, Rebecca Lush, Ben Dawkins, Mike Millian, and Ben Crowther for being with us here today. And of course, to our delegates, and if you're all up for it, I want to see what you think of those highway scenarios one more time. Terry's going to put that poll up, which we've been asking throughout the series. And based on what you've heard today, has anything changed in terms of where you're at with it? And I think I really like that fix it first principle, because that comes under the optimization, and that's one that I'm definitely been focused on, and Transport Futures has been focused on since 2008. And so we'll take a look in a second what the results are there. I was going to say that it was in November 2017 that a fellow who was with the Region of Waterloo at the time, Jeffrey Keyworth, as a delegate, and he suggested I facilitate an 8-hour one-day highway planning conference. And so in January of 2019, I got down to that. And actually, it was January 2020, got down to that with a May 2020 date. Well, something happened in March that year that just totally stopped that whole idea from happening. COVID hit, the idea was put off. I worked on some other research projects. And in the end, the one-day conference has become this 21-hour webinar series. So over the last 12 weeks, 45 fantastic speakers have dissected highway expansion, optimization, replacement, financing, communications, construction, operations, and today these amazing stakeholder perspectives. All of them, I think, have helped us sort of ratchet down the rhetoric and polarization so we can consider what role highways will take in the future. So it's an awesome job that has me inspired to continue the series in October, and there is still many gaps to fill. So with that, I'm going to do Transport Futures tradition, our mobility raffle, and we've got everybody's name. See if my presentation, so everybody's here, and we'll see who the winner is. This is for a daily commercial news 1-year subscription, the best construction newspaper this side of Hampshire. And who is it? Anthony Panza. So Anthony, if you're online, you have to be here. You'll win that subscription. And we got one more membership, I should say, to Transport Action Ontario, who did that 407 report that came up in the discussion today. Don Wall. He works for Daily Commercial News, so I'm not sure if he'll want that or not. We'll give that to him. Sponsor always should get a prize at some point for all their support. So that is that. I will unshare this. How do I unshare? Stop share. There we go. Come back to you. So we'll take a look at those second poll results again, and depends on location. Expanded and optimized actually came up. So that's interesting because I'm not sure if that was a consensus with our panel, but depends on location continues to win the day. So we'll close that one off. And thanks once again to our great speakers today, our advisors for referrals. I get referred to a lot of speakers. I say, this is the person I need, and they refer me. Speakers, like I said, from the past have referred me to people, and all of them come on board. And I think we're up to probably about 230 speakers since the beginning of Transport Futures. And I was going to say, we have to have our 15th anniversary come November. So also to our sponsors for their generous financial and in-kind support. And that includes, of course, Terry Johnson, who has helped with the tech throughout the series, done a fantastic job. And finally, I'd like to thank each of you, as I always do, the delegates, for paying the toll to join us today. And I'll be in touch about how the Highway Series continues in the fall. We'll be looking for your suggestions as well. So in the meantime, have a great summer, and we'll be in touch. So thanks again. Bye for now. And I don't know, is there some kind of applause we hear? Maybe he's going to do some kind of amazing applause. We don't have that. So we'll just hear it virtually, and speakers who can stay with us will have a debrief session with that other link. So we'll talk to you soon. Take care. Be in touch.